Chapter 1998. Shenjuli's punishment for her sneaky behavior was horrible. If she played any tricks, he would release 2 more of them. There were 2 days when little Shuama didn't eat any fish. Instead, she was punished with a few fish. After such a punishment, little Shuama finally learned her lesson. She didn't dare to play any tricks in front of him. Fishing was really a way to train one's willpower. After being tortured by him for more than 10 days, little Shuama became much quieter and more obedient. More importantly, the fish was very nutritious. Not only did it help her recover quickly, but it also helped her to recover her power. The only drawback was that it was too tiring to fish in different ways. Every day, her back would ache and her legs would cramp. If it wasn't for little Shuama's leg cramping in the water, Ning Shuama wouldn't have been able to possess the body successfully. Ning Shuama remembered that before she left, Shenjuli promised her that he would help her recover her power in 10 days. He said that she would suffer a little. Could it be that this strange fishing method was a way to recover her power? Actually, it wasn't that bad. More importantly, little Shuama was the one who suffered the most. After she arrived, little Shuama's power of mind had recovered by half. She had gotten a great deal. Ning Shuama was absorbing little Shuama's memory while she was thinking. She wanted to see when the Almighty would wake up. She had never seen Shenjuli drunk before. This was an eye-opener. She swam over slowly and approached the edge of the whirlpool. She transmitted her voice to him. "Julie, what are you doing?" Shenjuli lowered his eyes slightly. His fingers were still forming a seal, as if he didn't hear her. There were more and more whirlpools around him. These whirlpools were in all kinds of shapes. There were whirlpools in the shape of tornadoes, mushrooms, and even 6-petal flowers. Ning Shuama tilted her head and watched. She didn't quite understand why Shenjuli had created so many whirlpools. Every time Shenjuli created a new kind of vortex, he would reach out his finger to feel the vortex for a moment, then shake his head, as if it was not the vortex he wanted. Then he would look down and think for a moment, then continue to create a new one. Ning Shuama had once studied the books in Shenjuli's study room. Many of the books were personally written by Shenjuli. In other words, a lot of his martial arts were self-created and not learned from others. Could it be that he was creating a new cultivation technique? Ning Shuama suddenly thought of the words he had written in his study. Time travel, the past, the future. And her heart skipped a beat. Could it be that he was also researching ways to travel to the past and the future when he was drunk? Looking at those vortexes again, they looked a little like the space-time vortexes that one would see when traveling through space-time. She remembered that when she was with Shenjuli, she seemed to have unintentionally mentioned space-time vortexes. His heart was actually still thinking about finding her, wasn't it? Ning Shuama's heart suddenly felt warm. She now understood that 50,000 years ago, the Almighty's feelings for little Shuama were more like the love an elder had for a younger generation. At the very least, he hadn't really fallen in love with her. But everything had changed. After she had traveled through time, Shenjuli had fallen in love with her after she had traveled through time. That was why he couldn't forget her. It was obviously the same body and the same soul, but they had 2 different personalities. She didn't know if Shenjuli thought that she had schizophrenia. He was actually able to distinguish between them so quickly, which was also a kind of ability. Ning Shuama looked at him with interest. It was rare to see a drunk Almighty. Let's do a small survey. What time do people usually read books? Roll around all kinds of tickets? Haha. Chapter 1999. Shenjuli was so focused on creating the whirlpool that he even forgot about the fish that he had already slaughtered and threw it aside. The fish was swept out by the whirlpool and rushed to Ning Shuama's side. Ning Shuama caught it and looked at Shenjuli, then looked at the fish in her hand and touched her rumbling stomach. She said decisively, "Guru, you practice here first. I'll go up and roast the fish and wait for you. Turn around and swim upstream." She had just swum up 2 or 3 meters, but before she could jump out of the water, she suddenly heard the sound of water splashing. Her waist was tightly held, and she fell into the arms of a person. Ning Shuama turned around and saw Shenjuli's shining eyes. "What? Did you call me?" His voice was slightly hoarse. This person was drunk, but still so fast. Ning Xuema blinked her eyes, and her eyes were full of innocence. Julie? Julie's arms stiffened slightly, and the strength of holding her loosened a little. No, what did you call me just now? Ning Xuema blinked again. Divine Lord. Julie stared into her eyes, and Ning Xuema stared back at him curiously. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Finally, the light in Julie's eyes dimmed, and he slowly let go of her. He raised his hand to rub his forehead and whispered, "Was I hallucinating?" His voice was very soft, but Ning Xuema still heard it clearly. She sincerely explained to him, "I think you're drunk. It's not a hallucination." Julie frowned and returned to his indifferent look. "I'm not drunk. I never get drunk when I drink." Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Generally, people who got drunk would never admit that they were drunk. This was common sense, so Ning Xuema automatically ignored his previous explanation. However, she was interested in the last sentence. People who were drunk often had to think in reverse. He said that he would never get drunk after drinking. Did that mean that he would get drunk every time he drank? Ning Xuema's eyes sparkled. Julie's body sank down again, as if he wanted to sink back into the water to meditate. Ning Xuema ignored him and continued to swim upstream. When she was about to reach the surface of the water, she turned back to look at him. He was slowly sinking. The great deity was indeed a great deity. Even in the water, he could sink as deep as a Buddha. The water was extremely clear. Ning Xuema watched as he slowly sank, his clothes floating in the water. That scene was too beautiful to behold. Almighty! I deeply feel that your sinking water diagram can also be painted into a painting and framed for people to worship. Ning Xuema could not help but tease him. She turned over and swam upstream again. Her kung fu had not recovered much. After staying in the water for so long, she felt a little suffocated. She had to come up to the surface to breathe in the fresh air. However, before her mouth and nose could come out of the water, her body was pulled by a huge force and suddenly sank down. Almost in the blink of an eye, her body was locked in an embrace again, and she could no longer move. Julie looked down at her. His deep blue eyes seemed to be turbulent, but his face was calm. He slowly said, "I heard it. It's not a hallucination. You called me Almighty." Ning Xuema pretended to be confused. "What's wrong with calling you Almighty? You're back, aren't you?" Julie held her body tightly. Haven't I always been here?" Ning Xuema blinked again. She resisted the urge to reach out and hug his neck. Every time she fell into his arms, she wanted to hug him back. Julie did not say anything. He just kept looking at her. Chapter 2000. However, Xuema didn't want to stay in the water with him. She was really suffocating to the point of panic. She could not help but struggle a little. "Well, let go of me first. Let me go up and take a breath first. I'm suffocating." Julie's eyes flashed again. Suddenly, he lowered his head and kissed her on the lips, making her swallow the rest of her words. Ning Xuema's head buzzed. She had always been unable to resist Julie's kisses, especially when they had not seen each other for half a month and had missed each other so much. She could not help but open her mouth slightly, wanting to respond to him. However, he took a breath first. That breath still had a faint smell of wine, but it was unusually refreshing. It went into her lungs and opened her lungs, which were a little lacking in oxygen because of suffocation. It was so comfortable. Ning Xuema could not help but stick out the tip of her tongue to tap his teeth, wanting to get a little more from his mouth. Julie's eyes darkened, and he directly kissed her deeply. Ning Xuema did not know how many times he had kissed her in her life. Once he started, she automatically began to respond. Their lips and tongues intertwined. Their breaths and movements were incomparably familiar. It was as if they could ignite the fire in the deepest part of their hearts, making it burn automatically when their lips and tongues intertwined. A deep kiss was enough to make each other's blood boil. A deep kiss seemed to be able to soothe the uneasiness and anxiety in their hearts. During the deep kiss, Ning Xuema could not help but wrap her arms around his neck. It was a familiar action, a familiar person, and a familiar desire. After the kiss, Ning Xuema opened her eyes and saw Julie's eyes that seemed to be able to drown people. At this moment his eyes were shining. He had recognized her. He must have recognized her from this kiss. Little Shuama was not as skilled as her, and her cooperation would not be so high. Damn it, he actually used this method to verify. Ning Shuama raised her hand and saw that she did not grow older. She still looked like a 12 or 13-year-old. Hey, you're molesting a young girl. Ning Shuama accused him first. However, her emotions were still surging, so her voice was a little hoarse. It didn't sound like she was criticizing him, but more like she was acting coquettishly. Shinjuli didn't say anything, as if he was afraid that she would run away. His left arm was still around her, but his right hand flashed a ball of white light that enveloped her whole body. A moment later he smirked. How about this? Ning Shuama didn't need to look at herself to know that she had grown bigger again. She had become more suitable for him to do whatever he wanted. Although they were in the water, she could feel that his body was burning hot. The arm around her waist was so hot that it wanted to pull her into his body. His body temperature made her heart beat wildly. After all, they had done it so many times that she was already familiar with his body. He looked at her with a deep gaze, and his lips curled into a faint smile, like a child who had just pulled a prank. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. He was usually cold and arrogant. It was the first time she saw such an expression on the Almighty's face. Was he still drunk, or was he already sober? Ning Shuama was a little uncertain, so she deliberately provoked him. You're forcing me to mature. It doesn't count. My original body is that of a young lady. 1,200 years old Shuama. Shinjuli touched her lips with his finger and said in a low voice, if you didn't eat that lousy flour, your child could be a soy sauce now. Ning Shuama was shocked. The Almighty also knew how to talk about soy sauce. Needless to say, the Almighty remembered those words that she used to whisper in his ear. Chapter 2001. Ning Shuama was shocked. The Almighty also knew how to talk about soy sauce. Needless to say, it was the phrase that she used to whisper in his ear, and the Almighty remembered it. In fact, their child was already old enough to talk about soy sauce. Unfortunately, she could not bring it over. Ning Shuama thought of little Nianma, and her heart was burning with anxiety. After all, little Nianma was still too young. Even if she explained some of the strategies to him, he would not understand and would not know how to act. After Luo Jiuchen locked her up in the prison, he would definitely secretly observe little Nianma's movements to determine whether Ning Shuama had a conspiracy. Therefore, Ning Shuama did not tell little Nianma about her plan to be locked up this time. When she went to the meeting, she only told the child to wait patiently in Mo Palace, and that she might be a few days late. After she was locked up, based on Luo Jiuchen's personality, he would definitely secretly inform everyone in Mo Palace. Little Nianma might have already known about it, and she did not know how anxious he would be these few days. She thought that she would be able to get out tonight, but at such a critical time, she traveled to another world. She did not know how the people who came to pick her up would react when they saw that she was dead. Could they bring her body out of the prison? If she did not wake up, the rest of the plan could not be carried out. Sigh, this was really not a good time to travel. She was regretting, and suddenly her waist was tightened. How can you be distracted at this time? Ning Shuama finally woke up. Suddenly, she felt a chill between her eyebrows. Shinjuli pointed between her eyebrows with one of his fingers, and a white light appeared. It seemed like he was forming a kind of spell. What are you doing? Ning Shuama looked at him blankly. She could feel Shinjuli's power of telekinesis flowing in her body. I am keeping you here. Shinjuli looked very serious. You can't run away again. After all, Ning Shuama had learned spells from him, so she could recognize that it was a spell to calm the soul. Usually, when someone was frightened or had lost their soul and was summoned back, they would use this technique to calm their soul and calm their mind. Even the worst disciple under Shinjuli could use this kind of magic. After Ning Shuama learned it, she even used this kind of magic to summon the soul of a child. She did not expect Shinjuli to use it on her today. It was a low-level spell. Did he think that her departure was an ordinary loss of soul? Ning Shuama watched as he earnestly cast one requiem incantation after another on her body. It was simply an encyclopedia of requiem incantations. He probably used all the requiem incantations he knew on her body, just so she wouldn't leave. Ning Xuema felt both sour and warm in her heart. She silently calculated. There was still more than 2 hours before the agreed time with the reinforcements. She still had time. When she didn't possess a body and was only a soul, she really couldn't go back. But now that the possession was successful, if she wanted to leave, she just had to tell the Almighty that she came from the future 50,000 years in the future, and she could return with a whoosh. It was rare to be reunited with him. Ning Xuema couldn't help but hug him tightly. Almighty! She even raised her head and kissed him on his smooth chin. Shen Juli was busy casting spells on her. Her kiss made his fingers tremble. Be good, he muttered under his breath, and cast another talisman. Ning Xuema knew that the spell couldn't be interrupted during the casting, or it would be easy to make the spell ineffective. Looking at his serious face, she suddenly had a mischievous idea. Not only was she not obedient, but she even reached out to touch his lips. Almighty, your lips are so beautiful. They are so perfect that I want to kiss them again and again. Chapter 2002. Shen Juli's fingers froze again. Both of his hands were busy, so he couldn't stop her. But the arm around her waist tightened. Be good, don't make trouble. He didn't want her to make trouble, but she wanted to. Ning Xuema narrowed her eyes and tiptoed to kiss his lips. Then she lowered her head to kiss his Adam's apple. She could clearly feel his heartbeat quickening and his breathing becoming heavier. Pulling down an otherworldly deity from the altar and letting him have the 7 emotions and 6 desires that an ordinary man should have was actually a kind of subjugation. Right now, Ning Xuema felt the pleasure of conquering him. Most of the time, he was the one who teased her. Now that she finally had the chance to tease him, she naturally wouldn't let it go. While he was busy, her little mouth was like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water on his cheeks, nose, lips, Adam's apple, and collarbone. She was having fun, so she didn't know when Shen Juli had stopped casting the curse. It wasn't until he suddenly pressed her upper body against his and bit her earlobe that she came back to her senses and blurted out, "Why are you so fast?" She thought that he would need at least 30 minutes to cast this series of curse techniques. "Is it fast?" he whispered in her ear. "Then let's take it slow." Before Ning Xuema could react, he had already taken off her belt and peeled off her clothes from her shoulders. God! She had shot herself in the foot. She quickly reached out to stop him. Great God, we're still in the water. Shen Juli held her hand and looked at her sideways. He said word by word, "I want to taste your taste in the water." He said it leisurely, but his actions were incomparably strong. He didn't give Ning Xuema any room to resist. Ning Xuema still wanted to say something, but his lips blocked her mouth and gave her another breath of air. He was a little out of breath and said in a hoarse voice, "Be good, let me feel the real you." Ning Xuema. Under his strong and skillful attacks, she was soon powerless to resist. He finally felt the real her. Of course, she also felt that the real him was incomparably real. The moon in the sky was moving to the west. Ning Xuema lay weakly on the shore, without any strength to struggle. Beneath her was a thick furry blanket, and on her body was a thin quilt. A breeze blew over, and she sneezed. She raised her hand to rub her nose, wanting to cry but having no tears. Sure enough, a man couldn't be easily enlightened. Once there was a first time, the first thing he would think of when they met again would always be this. Her original intention was to tease him in the water, but she did not expect that he would happily roll her into the water. Sob. Her waist, her legs, and that inconvenient place were all sore and painful. What was even worse was that she had to pay a heavy price for saying the word quick. He had tormented her in the water for almost 6 hours. When she first entered the water, the sun was still high in the sky, but when she came out of the water, the moon was already in the west. She was so tired that she didn't even want to move a finger. She felt more tired than fighting. The worst thing was that Shen Juli didn't seem to have sobered up. After he carried her to the shore, he casually conjured a blanket to use as a bed and stuffed her into the quilt. Then, he crawled into the quilt and pulled her into his embrace. He hugged her tightly and gently touched her eyes. "Be good, go to sleep." Chapter 2003. Sleeping outdoors? Although the time here was the same as the other world, the seasons were different. When Ning Xuema transmigrated here, it was late autumn there. But here it was early spring. It was easy to catch a cold sleeping by the lake. Although too much joy and too much passion made Ning Xuema's usually astute brain somewhat tied up, she still had this bit of common sense. She struggled in his arms. "Let's sleep in the house." Shinjuli was puzzled. "Aren't we in the house?" His gaze fell on the moon in the sky and he frowned slightly. "The luminous pearl is too bright." He waved his sleeves in the direction of the moon. After a while the moon was still the same moon, hanging there so brightly. Ning Xuema finally understood that the Almighty was still drunk and had not really woken up. It was probably the first time that the luminous pearl was so disobedient. Shinjuli waved his sleeves in the direction of the moon twice, and each time, there was a white light. In the end, the moon hid behind the clouds and could not be seen anymore. She did not know if it was really frightened by the Almighty, or if it felt that his actions were a little boring. Shinjuli was finally satisfied. He hugged her and said, "Good girl, let's sleep." Ning Xuema was speechless. "Almighty, how drunk are you? After so long, you are still so hot and cute." She was really tired, so tired that her brain could not function properly. Moreover, his embrace was so warm. She closed her eyes and vaguely thought that with a human furnace like him by her side, she would not catch a cold even if she slept by the lake for a night. Right? So she snuggled into his arms again and fell asleep boldly reassured. It was a dreamless night. When Ning Xuema woke up, the sky was already bright, and the sun shone through the window. Ning Xuema was stunned for a moment under the blanket. She looked around and finally recognized that this was the waterside pavilion. The windows of the waterside pavilion were decorated with water plants, so Ning Xuema could recognize it at a glance. She raised her head and rubbed her temples. The crazy scenes from last night flashed through her mind. She remembered that she had fallen asleep by the lake. When did she move into the waterside pavilion? Also, what about Shinjuli? She lifted the blanket and got out of bed. She realized that she had already put on her clothes. Of course, it wasn't the usual one. Instead, it was a loose nightgown that was warm and comfortable. Needless to say, this was all thanks to Shinjuli. Ning Xuema stretched her arms and legs. Last night, when she fell asleep, she was clearly exhausted to the point of death. But now, it was as if she had been rejuvenated. Her whole body had an inexhaustible amount of energy. It seemed that he had massaged her again while she was asleep. What was even stranger was that she discovered that her skills seemed to have improved as well. Could it be that rolling around with the great god could increase one's power? Ning Xuema was still wondering when she suddenly smelled a strange fragrance of food, which made her stomach rumble. She rubbed her stomach. That's right, this little body hasn't eaten anything for a whole day. Plus, it's been an intense exercise. It would be strange if she wasn't hungry. Wait a minute. One day, Ning Xuema seemed to have thought of something, and it was like she had been struck by lightning. Not good. One day had already passed. The people who were waiting for her in that world should have already arrived. God, what would happen if they saw her die in the prison? Perhaps that bastard Luo Jiuchen would be alerted. She had to go back immediately. She subconsciously wanted to find Shinjuli and tell him the truth before going back. Chapter 2004. She knew that this was unfair to Shinjuli, but the timing of this transmigration was not right. She had to wear it back. She followed the smell of food and soon saw Shinjuli behind the waterside pavilion. He was watching over a row of pots slowly cooking. Ning Xuema paused. Shinjuli heard the movement and turned around. "You're awake? Come and sit down." With a wave of his hand, there was a brocade stool beside him. Ning Xuema walked over, sat down, and looked at the row of pots. There were frying pans, stir-frying pans, stewing pans, and even barbecuing pans on the table next to him. There were a few blue and white porcelain plates. There were a few kinds of fish on the plates. Stir-fried fish, fried fish, grilled fish, stewed fish. There was really a variety of fish to eat. What was more rare was that these fish looked, smelled, and tasted good. It showed that he was serious about making fish. Shinjuli was obviously in a good mood. There was even a slight smile on his lips. His eyes reflected the lake water not far away. The Almighty rarely showed his emotions. It was even rarer to see him in a good mood like today. Ning Xuema naturally knew why he was happy. She felt an inexplicable bitterness in her heart. He was so happy because of her return. If he knew that she would go back soon, would he be disappointed? What was worse was that she didn't know when she would come back again after she left this time. Almighty. She coughed and prepared her opening speech. Are you hungry? You can eat whatever you want. Shen Julie conjured a pair of ivory chopsticks that looked like white jade and handed it to her. Ning Xuema paused. Why don't we wait until we finish eating the fish? We can't let the fruits of his labor go to waste. She took the chopsticks and looked at him. Let's eat together? Shen Julie was preparing the last fish. Looking at his knife skills on the fish, it seemed like he was going to make squirrel fish. You eat first. I'll accompany you later. He did not look back and continued to busy himself. Ning Xuema looked at him. It was obviously a very domestic action, but he did it smoothly. It did not seem like he was cooking, but like he was carving flowers in his free time. Her heart ached, and she could not help but hug his arm. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'll wait for you. Shen Julie looked at her who was like a little bird and teased. I thought you would say you'll cook the last dish. Ning Xuema could not help but laugh. I'm not good at cooking. If you're not afraid that I'll spoil your fish, I'll cook this dish. You're in charge of eating, Shen Julie said decisively. He had already eaten her cooking a few times, and at most it was barely edible. She was now recovering. It was better to make more nutritious food, so that she could eat more and recover faster. He was already very happy that she could wait for him. He waved his sleeves at the dishes that were already prepared. Each plate was covered with a transparent cover. This could not only keep the food warm, but also preserve the freshness of the food. Guru, what have you been researching in the study these days? Ning Xuema tried to find a topic. Researching a way to catch you. Shen Julie did not hide his purpose at all. You know I'm. Ning Xuema could not help but speak. However, before she could finish her sentence, Shen Julie put a finger on her lips and said, You don't have to say it. He cut her off. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. The guru knew that as long as she told the truth about where she came from, she would be transported back. Chapter 2005. Xuema, I don't care where you are from. I just want you to stay. Shen Julie was straightforward. Ning Xuema was speechless. This topic seemed to be a little heavy. She could not stay. Otherwise, what would happen to little Nianmo? She seemed to see little Nianmo's big teary eyes in front of her. Her heart ached. She did not want to continue this topic. She smiled and said, Master, how much did you drink last night? You were so drunk. The master looked so cute when he was drunk. He was a little dull, and his reaction was half a beat slower. However, he still felt that he was sober, and the things he did were amusing. If possible, she would like to make him drunk a few more times. Shen Julie's fingers froze. He pursed his lips and said, 10 jars. Was I drunk? Did she not know what he did after he was drunk? Of course you were drunk. You washed the fish and jumped into the lake. You even meditated at the bottom of the lake, and made a bunch of whirlpools. Ning Xuema told him what he did last night. Of course, she did not mention that he had sex with her in the water. She focused on the embarrassing incident, where he treated the moon as a luminous pearl, and wanted to extinguish it. She laughed and talked beside him. Although he could not remember most of it, he felt that his face was a little hot when he heard her talk. Shen Julie was rarely shy. When Ning Xuema said these things, she thought that he would blush. Even if his face was not red, his ears should be red. Usually, people who were cold on the outside would have ears red when they were shy. However, Shen Julie was obviously not an ordinary person. He did not blush at all. Instead, he seemed to be listening with great interest. After listening to her, he asked, Is there more? Ning Xuema was speechless. Almighty, don't you know what it means to be shy? She suddenly remembered something. Oh right. Last night, you used more than a dozen requiem spells on me. I was almost glowing. Shen Julie looked at her sideways. How do you feel? How do you feel? After I used the requiem spell on you, did you feel any other discomfort? Shen Julie was finally done with the last plate of fish. He put the fish down and cast a cleansing spell to freshen himself up. This time, He checked her pulse to see if it was effective. Ning Xuema shook her head. After being hit by the soul-pacifying incantation, before she could regain her senses, the great god had already pulled her onto the bed. However, she didn't seem to feel anything. Her movements were normal, and she even felt light and healthy. Even her bones seemed to have lightened by a few pounds. Shen Juli felt her pulse, and was quite satisfied. You're recovering well. You should be able to reach your previous level in 2 days. Alright, let's eat. The two of them sat facing each other as they ate. Ning Xuema thought that she would have to leave after finishing this meal. She was a little reluctant to part with him. Almighty, do you have any more wine? She wanted to drink a few cups with him. However, Shen Juli disagreed. Your current physique is not suitable for drinking alcohol. You can drink in a few days. I won't be here in a few days, Ning Xuema said in her heart. However, she couldn't say it out loud for the time being. She liked to eat grilled fish, so she reached out to take it. Shen Juli pushed a bowl of fish soup to her. Eat something soft first. It's not good for your health to eat grilled fish at the beginning. The Almighty was extraordinarily considerate. Ning Xuema felt warm and sour in her heart. If possible, she really didn't want to leave. However, after she arranged everything on the other side, she would definitely stay for a while when she transmigrated. Chapter 2006. It seemed that the Almighty had not gone out for more than half a month. How is the outside world? For some reason, Ning Xuema had a subconscious sense of avoidance towards the development of the outside world. She did not want to ask. She suddenly thought of Miao Fan. What did the Almighty do to Miao Fan? Did he rush back to the mortal world? It seemed that she did not disturb them these days. Almighty, your sister Miao Fan. She wanted to ask what happened to Miao Fan, but unexpectedly, the Almighty blocked her mouth with a piece of fish. Don't talk while eating. Well, it was a good tradition to not talk when sleeping or eating. She abided by it. Ning Xuema lowered her head and tried to eat all kinds of fish. The taste of these fish was different from ordinary fish. They were unusually fresh and smooth. She did not get tired of eating them. Shen Juli did not move his chopsticks much. Most of the time he looked at her eating. He seemed to be thinking about something. The Almighty's gaze seemed to have substance. Ning Xuema was a little scared by his gaze. She raised her hand and stuffed a piece of fish into his mouth. Are you hungry for this piece of fish in my hand? Haha, I'll give it to you. Her little hand was caught, and then her whole body fell into his arms. His voice was cold and magnetic, as if he was joking. What do you mean by this action? You're letting me eat you. Ning Xuema hurriedly struggled out of his arms and said sincerely, Almighty, you're thinking the wrong way. She was afraid that she would be caught and rolled in the sheets again, so she moved to the side. She and he were originally sitting on the edge of the waterside pavilion. Her movement was not a big deal, but she was caught off guard and suddenly lost her footing. With a cry of "Io!" she fell into the water with a splash. She quickly paddled a few times and popped her head out of the water. A white light flashed in front of her eyes, and suddenly there was another person beside her. Shen Juli hugged her waist. His voice was slow, but the words he said were very annoying. You're addicted to the taste? Ning Xuema did not react at first. When she did, even her ears were hot. She had the urge to splash water on his face. Almighty, where's your cold image? She wanted to jump onto the shore, but Shen Juli wouldn't let her go. The two of them played around in the water for a while. During this time, Ning Xuema was taken advantage of several times. Only then did they both jump ashore. The weather in early spring was quite cold. Ning Xuema sneezed as soon as she came up. Shen Juli waved his sleeves to dry her hair and clothes. He held her waist and said, Let's go in. He meant to enter the waterside pavilion. Ning Xuema's gaze fell on the waterside pavilion, and she felt uncomfortable. This was the place where she and Shen Juli used to sleep. 50,000 years later, it became Luo Jiuchen's territory and his bedroom. She looked at the richly ornamented rafters and painted rafters again. The layout outside was the same as it was 50,000 years later. She suddenly had an idea and hugged Shen Juli's arm. Great God, I don't like this waterside pavilion. Can you tear it down? Shen Juli raised his eyebrows. This waterside pavilion was actually built very stylishly. It was also one of his favorite places. How could she not like it? Shinjuli thought for a while, and finally remembered the dazzling pearl-like nest of the demon lord Shuama. She seemed to like the splendid architecture and layout. His Fanteon Palace was in the cold style of ink painting. No wonder she didn't like it. What kind of waterside pavilion do you like? Shinjuli began to sketch a new layout in his mind. Ning Shuama looked at him. You want to renovate this place? I can renovate it to the style you like. Chapter 2007. I can change it to the style you like. Shinjuli touched her hair. He had to make her comfortable here, so that she would be willing to stay for a long time. Ning Shuama was excited. Then I'll do it myself. She had recovered more than half of her power, so it was easy for her to make a building from the ground. She silently operated her magic, and stretched her fingers a few times. 4 or 5 red lights flew toward the waterside pavilion. She wanted to tear it down first, and make a water curtain cave here. She wanted to see if Luo Jiuchen still dared to live here 50,000 years later. If he dared to live here, she would pour water on him. The red light she emitted was very powerful. Not to mention such a small waterside pavilion. Even a tall building with several floors would be shattered into pieces. After a while, Ning Shuama looked at the waterside pavilion that was still standing there, and was a little stunned. Guru, what is this waterside pavilion made of? Why is it so sturdy? Shinjuli couldn't help but want to laugh. Stupid, this is where the gods live. If you want to change the building here, only I can do it. So that's it. Ning Shuama thought for a while, and suddenly thought of a problem. Now that Luo Jiuchen was the master of Fanteon Palace, would that bastard tear down the whole Fanteon Palace and rebuild it? The more she thought about it, the more frustrated she felt. Guru, if there is a new master here, will the new master rebuild this place? Shinjuli's eyes deepened. He thought of her real identity, which should be from 50,000 years later. Then he thought of the first time she came here. She hugged his waist tightly, as if they were reuniting after death. His heart skipped a beat. Shinjuli's reasoning ability was not ordinary. Based on a few words, he could guess the general result. He was a born god. When he had no worries, he didn't care about life and death. Whether it was life or death, he let nature take its course. But now, he had someone he cared about. He wanted to be together with her forever, not just for 50,000 years. In this world, there was only one person who could replace him, Luo Jiuchen. But a sub-god was a sub-god. It was not easy to replace the main god. Several conditions had to be met. Firstly, the sovereign had truly ascended. Secondly, the demigod needed to gain the trust of the people of the 6 realms. These 2 conditions were not easy to achieve, especially the last one, which was even more difficult. No matter how capable a person was, he might be able to control the people of the 6 realms through force and means, but he might not be able to gain their trust. Furthermore, it wasn't something that could be accomplished in a short period of time. Even 100 or 80 years might not be enough. As for Luo Jiuchen, with his temperament, how could it be easy for him to gain the trust of the people of the 6 realms? Even if he spent his entire life, he might not be able to do it. Of course, only the heavenly axiom and the true core gods knew about these conditions to replace the core gods. Even Luo Jiuchen wouldn't know until he became a true overgod, no matter how much he coveted the position of overgod. Fanteon Palace only recognized the Lord God. Once there was a new Lord God, it would automatically change its layout according to the aesthetic style of the Lord God. He thought for a moment and asked casually, Shuama, have you seen what Fanteon Palace looks like after it was rebuilt? Ning Shuama shook her head. No, I feel that Fanteon Palace has been the same for tens of thousands of years. When she left Fanteon Palace, it was still the same. However, after she left, she wasn't sure if the layout of the buildings inside had changed or not. Anyway, according to the reports of the spies, there was no movement outside Fanteon Palace. Chapter 2008. However, she wasn't sure if the layout of the building had changed after she left. Anyway, according to the report from the spies, there was no movement outside the Fanteon Palace. Judging from the appearance, The Fanteon Palace was still the Fanteon Palace. Guru, I want to transform this place into the Water Curtain Cave. Ning Xuema began to design the blueprint. She also knew how to draw. Although she didn't draw as well as Shen Juli's, the things she drew were still very realistic. Shen Juli watched as Gu Shijio took out a ruler and a pair of compasses. She had all kinds of modern drawing tools. He did not say anything, but he hugged her waist even tighter. After a while, Ning Xuema drew a standard building blueprint. Shen Juli picked it up and looked at it, then looked at her again. I didn't know you had such a deep mind. Ning Xuema was proud. When she was an agent, one of the skills she learned was to draw various architectural renderings. Of course, it wasn't to design buildings, but to make it easier to steal things from buildings. Shen Juli looked at it for a while. Why do I feel that this special waterside pavilion of yours is not a place for people to live in, but a place with mechanisms? The guru was really smart. Well, she almost forgot that the guru was also a master of mechanisms. She immediately said, yes, I want to design this place as a special place with mechanisms. It will make the people living here suffer. Shen Juli seemed to realize something and smiled. There are a few mechanisms here that are still too simple. Do you want me to help you improve it? Yes. So, Shen Juli really helped her improve it. When Shen Juli finished the last stroke, Ning Xuema stared at the blueprint and became more and more happy. How was this a waterside pavilion? It was simply a mechanism array. Guru, let's modify it according to this blueprint. Ning Xuema made the final decision. Shen Juli smiled. Look back again. Ning Xuema subconsciously turned around and was stunned. She didn't know when, but the waterside pavilion had disappeared, and the mechanical building that she had drawn on the blueprint had risen from the ground. There was not the slightest difference. Ning Xuema's eyes sparkled. God was indeed a god. He could build such a complex building in such a short time. Ah, she saw a new building here. Which one did that bastard Luo Jiuchen see? The moon was high in the sky, and Luo Jiuchen was tossing and turning in his room. That girl would give in, right? What kind of answer would she give him in 2 days? He didn't know why, but he felt uneasy tonight and couldn't fall asleep in the middle of the night. He closed his eyes. He couldn't be so impatient. Now that the initiative was in his hands, he wasn't afraid that the girl would come up with any new tricks. He did not fall asleep until dawn. He had too many things to deal with these days, so he was especially tired and slept very soundly. He didn't dream at first, but later, he dreamed that he was walking in a heavy rain, and he couldn't avoid the rain even with his spells. He was drenched like a drowned rat. After a while, he felt as if he was immersed in cold water, and he was shivering from the cold. He shuddered and suddenly opened his eyes. Then he got a shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. Before he fell asleep, he was lying on a soft bed, but now the soft bed was suddenly gone and replaced by an ice pool. The ice in the ice pool rippled and cold air came out. What was even worse was that water that came out of nowhere was splashing down on his head. Chapter 2009. What was going on? He suddenly jumped out of the pool drenched, but he didn't know what he stepped on. But with a cracking sound, a row of sharp arrows came out of nowhere and shot towards him. Luo Jiuchen frowned. He was a sub-god and had extraordinary skills. Naturally, he was not afraid of these small arrows. With a wave of his sleeve, a purple light was emitted and shrouded his body. Those sharp arrows hit his purple light barrier. Chi-chi. With several sounds, several sharp arrows actually pierced through his protective light screen and directly shot into his body. Luo Jiuchen opened his eyes in shock. In this world, other than Shen Juli, who had already immortalized, no one could penetrate his light barrier. How did these seemingly ordinary arrows do it? When the arrows hit his body, the tips of the arrows drilled into his flesh and blood spurted out. Even if he was a sub-god, he still knew pain. He could not help but groan. When the arrows entered his body, it was as if they had not pierced his body but his soul. The arrows were still shooting wildly. This time, he did not dare to use his light barrier to block them. Instead, he pulled out his sword and formed a sword barrier around him. The arrows were like a torrential rain as they landed on his sword banner, clanging incessantly. The force of the arrows was so strong that his wrist was numb. The sword in his hand was almost knocked out of his hand. When the rain of arrows finally passed, his palm was already broken, and his entire arm was numb. He stood in place and his expression changed greatly. He was no stranger to this kind of arrow rain. 50,000 years ago, when he fought with that person, he had a taste of it. His gaze fell on the arrow that he had not pulled out in time. He gritted his teeth and pulled it out. The moment he saw the arrow, his fingers trembled. The arrow looked simple, but was extremely sharp. The arrow was flowing with psychokinesis, and it buzzed in his palm. Luo Jiuchen threw the arrow away, as if he had been stung by a scorpion. This arrow was Shinjuli's. The psychokinesis flowing on it was also Shinjuli's. Luo Jiuchen's face was pale. He could not help but look around. Only then did he realize that the entire layout of the place he was sleeping in had changed. It had become completely unfamiliar. There was a creaking sound coming from the ceiling and walls, as if some mechanism was being activated. This scene was too strange, and he didn't have time to think about it. Subconsciously, he felt that he couldn't stay in this room any longer. He leaped up and rushed toward the door. As he moved, he didn't know what mechanism was triggered, but a large net fell from above his head 2 hours later. Luo Jiuchen stood there in a daze. He didn't even know if he had made it out of that strange room. He only knew that after dodging round after round of attacks from the heavenly net, round after round of cold arrows, fire arrows, sharp knives, and heavenly fire, he finally jumped out of a window. Unexpectedly, he jumped into the clouds. Everywhere was a vast expanse of clouds, and from time to time, a string of lightning flashed across the sky. He could not see any place that seemed like a way out. His fingers were clenched tightly, but cold sweat seeped out of his palms. It was as if he had fallen into a trap, and he was no stranger to this trap. Many years ago, Shenjuli had used this trap to trap him. He had been in the trap for a long time, but had not been able to break out. Of course, he had broken through this trap once before. After studying it, it was not too difficult to break through it again. What made him break out in cold sweat was not the trap, but the person who set it up. Could it be that Shenjuli was not dead? He was back again, back to take back his things. Chapter 2010. Could it be that Shenjuli didn't die? He came back. Did he come back to take back his things? How could it be possible? If he didn't die, he couldn't have gotten the Bell of Heaven way. Besides, it was impossible for him to not die when he sealed Zisha. What was going on? Luo Jiuchen was thinking as he rushed left and right in the matrix. But soon he couldn't think anymore, because he found that the matrix looked the same as before, but several key points inside had changed. For example, the original gate of life had become the gate of death. There were countless traps and traps in the matrix. Luo Jiuchen was so powerful, but he still found it difficult to move. He was even injured several times, and his purple clothes were stained with blood. He was full of anxiety and confusion, and the voice-transmitting spell on his waist suddenly lit up again. The light was light red, which meant that the other party was a spy he arranged in the prison. Did Shuamo finally think it through and want to see me? Luo Jiuchen didn't know whether he was happy or nervous, so he quickly opened the voice-transmitting spell. After a while he was disappointed. The voice-transmitting spell was full of busy tones, and he couldn't hear anyone talking at all. Obviously, the matrix he was in now blocked the signal of the voice-transmitting spell. As long as he couldn't break out of the matrix, he couldn't really get through the voice-transmitting spell to know what was going on over there. Luo Jiuchen was flustered and anxious, but he couldn't do anything in a short time. Ning Xuema squatted there and watched Shinjuli draw. He seemed to be addicted to drawing, and he modified and added from time to time. Ning Xuema had already seen that he was setting up a very complicated matrix, and the crisscross lines would make people dizzy if they didn't know how to draw. Guru, has anyone ever broken through your matrix? Will it be easier to break through next time? Ning Xuema asked. Shinjuli's pen paused, and he put her on his lap. Do you have any better ideas? Ning Xuema tilted her head and studied the matrix for a long time. Your matrix is a bit complicated, and I can't understand it at the moment. But if someone breaks through it, It's better to make some improvements and change the gate of life and death. Shenjuli's eyes flashed. That's a good idea. As he drew, he explained the array to Ning Xuema. After explaining, he handed the pen to her. Come make the changes. Ning Xuema could see that the layout of the waterside pavilion was changed by Shenjuli's brush. This stroke of his was simply a divine brush. No, it was his hands that had this magical ability. It had nothing to do with this pen, because she had casually conjured this pen. Shenjuli had even praised her for the uniqueness of this pen. If she were to modify it, would she also have this function? Ning Xuema was also an expert in mechanical techniques. And her mechanical techniques were even mixed with some modern technology. She looked at the map and studied it for a long time. She pointed at a few places with her finger. I think we can modify these places. Normally, when people break through this matrix and fall into this matrix, they will have a kind of habitual thinking and will still follow the original path out. Why don't we do the opposite? What she said was clear and logical. And it was true that she had pushed through the old to bring out new ideas. There were some places that even Shenjuli did not expect. But once she said it, he felt enlightened. He looked at her in his arms, and she always surprised him. Guru, if I start writing, can I immediately change the real layout of the matrix? Shenjuli held her little hand. Come, this will do. Chapter 2011. His big palms were warm. And when he held her hand, she felt a warm current flowing from the back of her hand to her heart. She was really greedy for his embrace, and she really couldn't bear to leave him. Ning Xuema snuggled in his arms, and the two of them discussed and changed some places from time to time. Unknowingly, the array in the waterside pavilion had combined the wisdom of the two of them, and it could be said to be perfect. When Ning Xuema finished drawing the last stroke, she let out a sigh of relief. She looked at the drawing with satisfaction. Great deity, tell me, if someone who doesn't understand formations mistakenly enters this place, will it directly take their life? Shenjuli said. Even if it doesn't kill him, it can trap him for a few days and make him lose a layer of skin. Ning Xuema's eyes sparkled. Is it possible to kill him directly? That would save her a lot of trouble. When she went back, she would find a way to lure that bastard Luo Jiuchen there. Shenjuli shook his head. After all, the array is dead. Yes, if it could trap Luo Jiuchen to death with an array, then he wouldn't be a sub-god anymore. He would be called a defective product. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. By the way, Guru, that Luo Jiuchen is too despicable. I'm afraid that he will plot against us in the future. If you're not here, can you teach me how to deal with him? Shenjuli thought for a moment. He's a sub-god. Logically speaking, if he doesn't do something evil, he can't be completely sealed. Completely sealed? Can't he be completely killed? Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. Even gods could be immortalized. How could a god not die this time? Shenjuli said lightly. The heavens make him inferior to the gods in everything, so he has to be given a special skill. Ning Xuema. Damn, that bastard Luo Jiuchen's special skill is immortality? This was too much of a pain in the ass. Then what about completely sealing him? Ning Xuema settled for the next best thing. Severely injure him, seal him in a place, and use a divine curse as a medium. As long as the god does not die, he will never be able to come out. However, the problem was that the Almighty was already dead in that world, and he was even immortalized. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get him back. It would be great if the great god also had an immortal body. Perhaps even if he was immortalized, he could be reborn in a very short period of time. Thinking of this, Ning Xuema suddenly had an idea. That year little Xuema's curse technique was so effective. Then, could it be that her curse also had the same effect? Great God, can you use God's curse as you wish? Shenjuli could not help but laugh. How could it be that easy? The god's curse can only be cast under certain conditions, and the god will have to pay a great price to cast this curse. So that's how it is. It seems that if I want to use this demonic curse, I have to pay a huge price. Perhaps I'll have to pay with my life. Great God, you've dealt with Luo Jiuchen so many times. What's his weakness? Shenjuli shook his head slightly. I've only fought with him a few times. He's weak when it comes to arrays, and his martial arts are slightly worse than mine. However, he's immune to poison. Immune to poison? What about poison of heavenly water? Ning Xuema's heart sank as she blurted out. Don't tell me that the poison of heavenly water is useless. Because of it, I've been imprisoned once. Shen Juli raised his eyebrows. What poison of heavenly water? The great god doesn't know? Is it true that the poison of heavenly water is that bastard's nemesis? Ning Xuema's heart was beating like a drum. She made up her mind and said, I heard that the poison of heavenly water is Luo Jiuchen's nemesis. Great god, you seem to have refined and collected a bunch of herbs. Chapter 2012. Shen Juli looked at her, and after a moment, he carried her and stood up. Let's go to my medicine refinement room. Shen Juli was in a daze as he looked at the 49 herbs that Ning Xuema had written down from memory. Ning Xuema was also in a daze as she looked at him. These herbs. Shen Juli paused for a moment. I've never heard of more than half of them in this continent. Where did you get this prescription from? Mother Earth said. Shen Juli frowned. Even though this person is a little heartless, her words are always true. Ning Xuema let out a slight sigh of relief. As long as it's true, it's fine. Great God, you said you've never heard of more than half of the herbs here. Is it because the places where these herbs grow are more remote and not known by people? Shen Juli shook his head slightly. That's not the case. As long as these herbs grow on this continent, it's impossible for me not to know. How about this? I'll make a trip to Mother Earth in the next 2 days and ask where these herbs grow. That was the only way out of the situation. However, Ning Xuema's heart stirred. Maybe some of the herbs here weren't from this continent. Otherwise, with the great god's ability, it was impossible for him to not be able to gather them. 50,000 years later, the great god's special medicine refinement room had gathered 46 herbs. Maybe 20 of them were gathered by Shen Juli after he reincarnated in Heaven Bestow continent and had always been in his storage space. After he recovered his memories from 50,000 years ago, he put those herbs together. The more she thought about it, the more likely it was. She raised her head to look at the sky. It was time for her to go back. She coughed and steeled her heart. Great God, actually I'm not from this era, I'm from... A finger suddenly sealed her little mouth, and Shen Juli stopped her from continuing. You don't have to say, I know everything. Ning Xuema was stunned. He already knew. But she had no choice but to say it. If she didn't say it, she wouldn't be able to wear it back. She grabbed Shen Juli's fingers and was about to speak again when Shen Juli interrupted her. Xuema, do you want to be with me forever? Of course. Everything she did was for the sake of being with him forever. Ning Xuema nodded. Yes. Shen Juli's lips curled into a smile as he ruffled her hair. That's it. Xuema, don't leave. Stay by my side. Ning Xuema was speechless. Why did she feel that Shen Juli seemed to be implying something? Forget it, I don't care. She had to leave. Goddess, in fact, I really want to stay by your side, but we still have Nianma. He is still so young. According to his age, he is not even 6 months old. Ning Xuema suddenly paused. Strange. She had said so many things about the future. But why did she still have no intention of leaving this body? Shen Juli looked at her with his arms crossed. Nianma is our son. Less than 6 months old? Yes. Yes. Shen Juli slowly said. Xuema, you and I are now together. Your body will be fully recovered after 8 to 10 days of rest. As for the reason why you are not growing up, I have already found out. I am preparing the prescription now, and I believe that I can cure you within a year. Logically speaking, after you and I are married, it is impossible for us to wait for 50,000 years to have a child. This is unreasonable. Ning Xuema was speechless. It was indeed unreasonable. If she did not travel through time, she would not believe it either. However, Xuema, since you are from the future, you must know what happened in the past 50,000 years. Why don't you explain it to me? Chapter 2013. Ning Xuema felt that the situation was a bit strange. In the past, as long as she mentioned the things that happened 50,000 years later, She would travel back in time. Now, after discussing with the Almighty for so long, she did not have any intention to leave. She was still sitting there. Where did the accident happen? As for the things that happened in the past 50,000 years, could she tell the Almighty in advance? If the Almighty knew about the problem of Wuxia in advance, he would definitely take precautions to prevent it from happening. In that case, history would be completely changed. Her little Nianma might really disappear. No, history had actually changed. At least, little Shuama did not become a demon. The one who suffered the inhuman torture was just a substitute. The substitute could not become a demon because of the resentment, right? Perhaps Wuxia would not happen again? No, she still had the memories of Ning Shuama and Shuayemo. It proved that the history of Wuxia had not changed. Little Shuama would still be reincarnated. Could it be that the substitute was really that capable? Ning Shuama was a little confused at this moment. She sat there in a daze. Shunjuli hugged her in his arms. Shuama, are you afraid that if you say it, history will be completely changed and little Nianma will really disappear? The Almighty was indeed very careful. He actually guessed her concern so quickly. She shook her head. Not only Nianma will disappear, but many things will disappear. Shuama, it's okay if you don't want to say it. Don't worry. Since little Nianma will be born 50,000 years later, we can have a child 50,000 years later. Ning Shuama shook her head. How could things be so simple? She blurted out. If we continue like this, little Nianma may not be the same little Nianma after 50,000 years. She had already learned that the world she was in now and the world 50,000 years later were parallel. It was like a three-dimensional space and a five-dimensional space. Although it was unbelievable, it was true. If she had been living here for 50,000 years, the child she had would definitely not be the same little Nianma. Or perhaps after she transmigrated and changed history, the original world would collapse and disappear completely. Perhaps she would also slowly disappear. After all, she had reincarnated twice before coming here. History had completely changed, and there would no longer be a special agent Ning Shuama in this world. Too many thoughts were entangled in her mind. She was momentarily confused and couldn't sort them out. Strange. She had already revealed so many secrets about the future world. Why didn't she have any intention of transmigrating back? Perhaps it was because Shunjuli had already guessed the contents, so it wasn't considered divulging heaven's secrets? Then she should say something more explosive. She took a deep breath and said, Great God, 50,000 years later, you will die and never come back. I will search the heavens and the earth, but I won't be able to find a way to revive you. She paused. She had already revealed so much. Why didn't she have any intention of wearing it back? She suddenly remembered the requiem spell that Shunjuli cast on her last night. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be the effect of those requiem spells? Great God, what did you cast on me? Those requiem spells. Ning Shuama suddenly had a bad feeling in her heart. Shunjuli had been looking at her the whole time. One of his arms was wrapped around her waist. When he heard her question, he seemed to be suffocating. He lowered his eyes slightly and said, Shuama, those soul-pacifying incantations are not soul-pacifying incantations, but soul-locking incantations. Chapter 2014. Ning Shuama looked at him with her eyes wide open, waiting for him to continue. Shunjuli closed his eyes and said, You came and went so suddenly that I tried my best to make you stay. That's why I came up with this idea, so that I could lock you up whenever you came back. It seems like I've succeeded. Ning Shuama was speechless. Her breath was stuck in her chest, and she couldn't breathe. She could not go back. She could not go back. She could not go back. What about Nianma? He had lost his father, and now he had lost his mother. How would he cry? Would Luo Jiuchen bully him? Ning Shuama's head was buzzing. She was really confused, and at the same time, she was angry. She suddenly looked up and pushed Shunjuli's arm away. She took a few steps back. Why did you use this method on me? Why didn't you tell me in advance? Did you consider my feelings when you acted on your own? She asked a series of questions like a machine gun. The more she asked, the angrier she became. He had always been like this. He did not respect her opinion at all. He did not even discuss it with her in advance. Shinjuli's face was slightly pale. He saw her anger, and his heart felt like it was being cut by something. She kept saying that she loved him and got along well with him, but she did not want to stay with him for a long time. Did she want to go back to the world without him? He took a deep breath. Shuama, I thought you were very willing to stay. What if I stay with Nianma? Luo Jiuchen, that bastard, will kill him. Shuama, if you stay here, perhaps history will change. If history changes, Nianma will be born and grow up under our protection. No one can bully him. Don't worry, I will change everything. I will not let you experience the pain of losing your husband 50,000 years later. By then we can still be reunited as a family. It was not like this. By then, Nianma might not be the same Nianma as before. If she and Shenjuli lived a smooth life for 50,000 years, there would be no Shuayemo and Ning Shuama. Her memories of the two lives would disappear. Would she still be the same person? Her mind was in a mess. She couldn't help but get angry at Shenjuli. That's different. I want the old little Nianma, not his replacement. Then you would rather stay in a future without me than a present where you can be with me? Shenjuli's voice was still very calm, but there was a hint of coldness in it. Ning Shuama was stunned by his question. She took a deep breath and said, I'm already thinking of ways to make you return. She thought of Xiaohe, who grew up in Mo Palace. The person you like is the me 50,000 years later, and not the me now? Shenjuli asked again. His questions were getting sharper and sharper. Ning Shuama was speechless. The great god was still the great god. His personality and appearance were the same. He did not even reincarnate. Regardless of whether history had changed or not, he would still live until 50,000 years later. The only difference was that the great god now did not have the memories of 50,000 years later. He did not know that he used to be called Han Shanyue. He did not know that he used to be the god of the Tianxi continent. He did not know that he had disciples, and he did not remember the past with her. Ning Shuama closed her eyes slightly. Yes, she was happy with him now. But, however, she always felt that she had lost a lot of the most important things in her life. Her life would become incomplete. Chapter 2015. She took a deep breath and suppressed the confusion in her heart. She said bitterly, You've always been you, whether it's now or 50,000 years later. But since you love me, you shouldn't make such a big decision on your own. At least, you should ask for my permission first. Shenjuli paused. Shuama, I wanted to discuss it with you after you came back, but I was drunk last night. When he was drunk and she came back, his first thought was to make her stay in his ecstasy. He didn't think too much about it, so he immediately cast the soul-locking spell on her the moment he recognized her. He was so drunk last night that his actions were a little messy. Now that he thought about it, he couldn't even remember some things clearly. After he sobered up, he still remembered that he cast the soul-locking spell on her. He felt a little uneasy. He knew that she might be angry, but he didn't expect her to have such a big reaction. This made him a little uncomfortable. Was she so unwilling to stay with him? Ning Shuama seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly looked up. Almighty, since you can cast this spell, you should be able to break it, right? Then you can break it for me. Shenjuli didn't look too good. He turned around and walked away. There's no break. Ning Shuama was speechless. She chased after him. You can't be so selfish. A figure flashed in front of her. Shenjuli grabbed her wrist and said in a deep voice, Shuama, is it selfish for me to try to keep you? What are you? Ning Shuama took a deep breath and said, I can come back again, but this time I have to. But this time I have to go back. She hugged Shenjuli's arm. Almighty, can you help me undo it? Her eyes were full of eagerness and desire, but in Shenjuli's eyes, it was a little dazzling. His arm was stiff. There's really no break. Ning Shuama's heart sank. She was so angry that she blurted out, If I knew you were so selfish, I wouldn't have come this time. Shenjuli. His expression changed and he took a step back. He looked at her for a moment, and there seemed to be waves in his eyes. After Ning Shuama said those words, she somewhat regretted it. However, the words had already left her mouth, and she couldn't take them back. Besides, she was also angry. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, unwilling to admit defeat. After a long while, Shunjuli finally said slowly, "I will find a way to send you back." Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief in her heart. He was a god. If he wanted to think of a way, he should be able to figure it out, right? A smile finally appeared on her face as she subconsciously said, "Thank you." As soon as she said that, she realized that something was wrong. With their current relationship, saying those two words was obviously too polite and distant. Sure enough, Shunjuli's expression became even worse. He faintly said, "You don't have to be so polite with me." Then he turned around and left. He walked too hurriedly and tripped on the door sill. He staggered slightly, but then he stood firm and strode away. Ning Xuema looked at his back as he left. She didn't know why, but she actually felt a sense of desolation from him. Her heart seemed to be pierced by something, and there was a slight pain in it. She knew that her words must have hurt him, but she also had her own difficulties. She would make it up to him in the future. Besides, he was the one at fault first. She shook her head and suppressed the strange feelings in her heart. She decided to just stay in his medicine refining room and practice her medicine refining skills. Unknowingly, a day passed. Chapter 2016. Ning Xuema was so engrossed in her alchemy that she forgot to eat and sleep. She even forgot to eat. When she woke up again, it was already dark outside. A few stars were scattered in the sky, as if she could reach out and pick them up. Perhaps it was because of the sumptuous fish feast. Ning Xuema didn't feel hungry even after a busy day in the alchemy room. When she came out, she remembered that Shunjuli hadn't come back since he left. Was he angry? In a fit of pique. Alchemy was not an easy job, especially high-level alchemy. She was so tired that her waist and back were aching. She stretched her arms, stretched her muscles and bones, and then walked to Shunjuli's study. If there was no accident, he should be in the study studying the way to break the soul-locking spell. She wanted to see how his study was going. Thinking of this, she walked to the door of the study, and unexpectedly found that the door was closed. It was dark inside, and there was no trace of anyone. So he wasn't in the study, then where did he go? Ning Xuema frowned slightly. She thought for a while, and ran to the solitary peak. She had recovered most of her power now, so she flew to the solitary peak easily. There was no one on the solitary peak, and Shunjuli wasn't there either. Only the heavenly law stone stood tall on the mountain peak, glowing faintly. Ning Xuema stood in front of the heavenly stone and looked at it with a complicated feeling. Heavenly Tao, what was the heavenly Tao? But it could make people like Shunjuli protect it. Was it fair? If it was fair, how could it let people like Luo Jiuchen be the sub-god? Why did it let her suffer so much? Even a relationship could be so successful, hovering between life and death. She was already angry, and now that she saw this stone, the fire in her heart burned even more. Heavenly Tao. What is the heavenly Tao? What are you? Can you control the life and death of the 6 realms? Ning Xuema looked at the heavenly law stone and reprimanded it. On the heavenly law stone, there were countless characters that she couldn't understand. They were intertwined with each other and were spinning rapidly. If she looked at it for a little longer, Ning Xuema would even feel a little dizzy. Hey, since you can get the great god to protect you, you should be stronger than him, right? Then can you undo the soul-locking curse he placed on me? No way, right? If you can't even do something like this, how can you call yourself the heavenly Tao? Don't tell me you're an extraterrestrial meteorite. The heavenly Tao is actually illusory, right? Perhaps you are very abstract, just like what we call heaven's will. Today, we know that heaven's will is heartless, and it's probably similar to you. Ning Xuema decided to sit in front of the heavenly Tao stone. She was in the mood for a long talk. If you really have spirituality, then show it in front of me, or take back that bastard Luo Jiuchen, and I'll believe that you're the heavenly Tao. Or you can just send me back to 50,000 years in the future, and I'll believe you too. Hey, say something. You can show me a few words too. Don't tell me you're just a stone that makes people dizzy. Other than that, don't you have any other functions? The heavenly Tao stone didn't seem to care about her. It just flashed as it should, and there was no change at all. Ning Xuema sighed and rubbed her eyebrows. Why was she venting her anger on a broken stone? Perhaps the heavenly Tao stone was just a kind of belief, and it didn't really have any miracles. She was about to stand up when a sentence suddenly appeared in her mind. Don't reveal the secrets of heaven. If you reveal them, it will change, and change will bring disaster. Chapter 2017. These words seemed to automatically echo in her mind, causing Ning Xuema's entire body to stiffen. She abruptly turned her head to look at the heavenly Tao stone. The heavenly Tao stone was still the same. Were those words a warning from the heavenly Tao stone? Did it show its power? Hey, you're quite intelligent. I don't want to reveal the secrets of the heavens. If you don't want me to reveal them, you can send me back. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to control my mouth. Ning Xuema took the opportunity to bargain with the heavenly Tao stone. Suddenly, a sparkling and translucent white light flashed from the heavenly Law stone, directly enveloping Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema's heart was filled with joy. Was this white light going to send her back? She didn't dodge. Just as her body was about to be enveloped by the white light, a hurricane suddenly rushed out and pushed Ning Xuema back a few steps. That white light missed its target and brushed past the corner of Ning Xuema's clothes. Ning Xuema was stunned. She was not satisfied and wanted to rush over again. However, a white shadow flashed in front of her eyes. Then, her waist was tightened, and she was lifted up into the air. After the white light from the heavenly Law stone missed its target, it unexpectedly turned around and chased after Ning Xuema. The white light looked ordinary, but it was extremely fast. When one looked at it carefully, it could even change into 7 colors. Ning Xuema knew who saved her the moment she was in the man's arms. Her body stiffened and she struggled. Hey, let go of me. I want to go back. It took her a lot of effort to make the heavenly Tao stone shoot out such a beautiful white light. This might be the way for her to travel back quickly. She was not willing to give up just like that. The man who hugged her was naturally Shen Jiuli. He held Ning Xuema's waist tightly and didn't say anything. That white light chased after them too quickly. He didn't have time to say anything as he carried her and dodged in a zigzag pattern. His movements were as fast as lightning. The white light chased after them, refusing to let go. It seemed that if it didn't send Ning Xuema back, it wouldn't give up. Shen Jiuli was so fast that it almost caught up with him a few times. It looked very dangerous. The white light suddenly spread out in a fan shape and covered the entire mountain in the blink of an eye. It was heading toward the 2 people who were flying around the mountain peak. Shen Jiuli's expression changed. He suddenly stopped. Kill me first if you want to kill her. He hugged Ning Xuema and used his back to block the white light. Swoosh! With a loud bang, the white light hit Shen Jiuli's back. Shen Jiuli's body trembled, and he stumbled forward. Ning Xuema was in his arms. Although she didn't come into direct contact with the white light, when the white light hit Shen Jiuli, she also felt as if she was hit by a strong current. She couldn't help but groan and almost vomit blood. The white light finally dissipated, and the mountain peak returned to its usual calmness. Shen Jiuli didn't stop for a moment. The moment the white light dissipated, he flew down the mountain peak with Ning Xuema in his arms. As soon as he landed, he threw Ning Xuema to the ground and shouted angrily, "Do you want to die?" Ning Xuema jumped up from the ground. Looking at his pale face, she was very unconvinced. "I just want to go back. That white light might be sending me back. Dream on. That white light is going to kill you. Once the white light touches you, your body and your soul will immediately break into millions of pieces and dissipate in the air." Ning Xuema was speechless. She also knew that she was a little rash because she was too anxious to go back. Chapter 2018. She also knew that she was a little rash because she was too anxious to go back. However, what he said about being swept by the white light should be wrong, right? Didn't the white light hit him? Other than his face being a little pale, he didn't seem to be injured. Shen Jiuli seemed to understand her doubts and sneered. "I'm a god, the guardian of the heavenly axiom. Naturally, it won't take my life. But you're a demon." He suddenly stopped talking. "What's wrong with me being a demon?" Ning Xuema felt that there was a hidden meaning in his words. Shinjuli closed his eyes slightly. Nothing. Forget it. It's my fault, I'll pay for it. Give me some time. I'll find a way to break the soul-locking curse on you. He didn't look at her anymore and turned to leave. His steps were a little staggered. He was hit by the white light of the heavenly axiom. Was he really injured? Ning Xuema's heart tightened. She couldn't help but take 2 steps forward and ask dryly. Are you injured? Shinjuli's footsteps paused slightly, but he didn't turn back and left directly. He walked very quickly and disappeared in an instant. It was as if he disappeared into thin air. Ning Xuema chased after him for a few steps, but she couldn't catch up. She stood in the same place for a moment. She didn't expect things to turn out like this. She sensed her body. She felt like she was hit by a strong electric current. Although her body was painful and numb, she didn't feel any other discomfort after that. That white light was actually more like a high-voltage electric current. Although she was in his arms and wasn't hit by the white light, according to the principle of conduction, she and Shinjuli should have been injured to the same extent. Since she was fine, he should be fine too. Moreover, he was the guardian of the heavenly axiom. The heavenly axiom naturally had to give him some face, and wouldn't really hurt him. Just now he left very quickly. It was as if he disappeared in the blink of an eye. His kung fu was so high, so even if he was injured it shouldn't be serious. He left alone probably because he saw her trying to think of a way to go back, and was hurt. Ning Xuema simply sat down on a rock by the roadside to organize her thoughts. She was too impatient when she realized that she was locked in here by the soul lock spell. She said a few hurtful words to the Almighty, and probably hurt him. I'll have a good talk with him when I go back. She wanted him to understand that she had her reasons for insisting on leaving. It wasn't because she didn't love him. She had been in love with him for 3 lifetimes. How could she not love him? Everything she had done was for his sake. It was all for the reunion of the family of 3. She would go back and make some arrangements. When she transmigrated again, she would stay here for a while and accompany him. The Almighty only had the memory of this life, and not the memories of the previous 2 lives. It was normal that he did not know about little Nianma. It was also normal that he did not care about little Nianma. Who would really care about a future child whom they had never met before and risk everything for the sake of this child? However, Gu Shijiu could not do that. She had little Nianma's existence in her memory. She had the memory of 2 lifetimes. It was undeniable that she loved the Almighty, who had the memory of 2 lifetimes. She also loved and liked the current Almighty. However, she hoped that he could really return after 50,000 years, and have the complete memory of 3 lifetimes. However, how should she explain it to him? Humans had a tendency to be lazy, just like Shinjuli now. He accepted the current world, and hoped that the present world would be stable. Chapter 2019. If she told him that little Xuema would die in order to seal the purple evil spirit, and that he would have to go to the Tianxi continent to experience the lives of Shui Yemo and Ning Xuema again, and finally return to the celestial devil continent to seal the purple evil spirit, she was afraid that he would not want it, and he would not want it. He would try to stop the purple evil spirit from happening in this life. He would stop everything that was about to happen. With his ability, if he knew everything in advance, he would definitely be able to stop it. If that was the case, the lives of little Nianma and herself would not exist. His memories of Ning Xuema's 2 lifetimes would also gradually disappear. The Almighty who once accepted her as his disciple, and was entangled with her for 2 lives would also be like the moon in the water, the flower in the mirror. He never existed at all. Thinking about it gave her a headache. She could not help but raise her hand to rub her eyebrows. At the very least, if the Almighty agreed with her thoughts, could she tell him everything? The heavenly law said, "Do not reveal the secrets of heaven. If you reveal it, it will change. If you change it, it will bring disaster." It was not just to scare her. If she told him everything, she was afraid that things would develop in a worse direction. In the world 50,000 years later, there was a little lotus growing in her Mo palace. Perhaps the Almighty would be reborn in it. If she revealed the secrets of heaven here, the little lotus might disappear directly. Then, the Almighty would have no hope of coming back. Therefore, there were some things that she could not say. She raised her hand to hit her temple. She just said that the Almighty was selfish, and that he only wanted to stay in the present. In order to keep her, he would do anything. In fact, she was also selfish because she also wanted to stay in the present. She had the memories of 3 lives, the present with little Nianma, and the present with the Almighty for 3 lives. She did not want to lose the present. She sat there and thought. Unknowingly, she was lost in her thoughts. A gust of cold wind blew a few leaves on her body and brought her back to her senses. She stood up and looked up at the sky. The sky was a little gloomy, and there were dark clouds rolling quickly in the sky. The sky was going to change. She turned and ran in the direction of the bedroom. If she was not mistaken, Shunjuli should be back there by now. It was better for her to talk to him calmly. She was very fast. In just a moment, she had arrived at the door of Shunjuli's palace. She looked up and saw that the palace was still dark. Shunjuli had not returned. Ning Xuema's feet paused for a moment. She had transmigrated here several times, and she would sleep here every night. This time, although she had a small conflict with Shunjuli, Ning Xuema did not want to sleep in another palace out of spite. She pushed the door. Not bad, the door opened easily. She walked in. There was a bed and a couch in the hall. Presumably, when Shunjuli and little Xuema were together, they slept separately even though they were in the same room. She paused for a moment before lying down on the small couch. It wasn't that she was putting on airs. After all, the two of them had just quarreled. If she slept on his bed again, she would lose too much face. Where would he go? Study room? Side hall? Medicine refining room? Would he not be angry and not come back? The wind outside was getting stronger and stronger. There was a big tree outside the window. It was swaying in the wind and reflected on the window like a ghost. Although there were alternating seasons in the Fantian Palace, there were not many bad weather like wind and rain. Ning Xuema had lived in the Fantian Palace for a period of time. It was sunny almost every day. She did not expect that there would be such a strong wind here. Chapter 2020. Crack! There was another flash of lightning outside, which lit up the window and then dimmed again. Is it going to rain? Ning Xuema sat up as if to answer her. After the flash of lightning, it started to rain outside. It was raining cats and dogs. Lightning, heavy rain, and strong wind were raging outside the window. The rain was like a whip hitting the windowsill, making a loud sound as if the sky had exploded. The heavy rain reminded her of the 3 days when Shunjuli had just immortalized. It was also raining cats and dogs, as if the whole world was crying for him. She had knelt in the heavy rain for 3 days and cried for 3 days. Since then, she had a natural aversion to heavy rain. Sometimes she would even feel fear for no reason. The sound of the rain was like a whip on her heart, which made her nervous for no reason. He wouldn't come back in such a thunderstorm, right? However, he was a god. If he wanted to come back, this little bit of rain wouldn't be able to stop him. Was he injured or not? She was staggering when she walked. Maybe he was hiding somewhere to heal himself? Usually, he would hide in a quiet room where no one could find him to heal himself after he got injured. He should be hiding somewhere to heal himself and wouldn't come back. Countless guesses spun around in her mind. She was extremely tired today, and at this moment, she was so sleepy that her eyelids were drooping. She wanted to have a good rest, so she closed her eyes. It was strange that she couldn't fall asleep, even though she was so sleepy. She couldn't help but listen to the sound of the door. The door was creaking due to the wind and rain, as if it was opening and closing with the sound of the wind. Ning Xuema then remembered that she didn't close the door when she came in. She jumped off the bed and ran around the screen to the outer room. She saw that the door was still open. The heavy rain had blown in, and a large patch of the door was wet. The rainwater was flowing in the hall. God, Shunjuli loved cleanliness. If he saw that his bedroom was soaked, he would be even more unhappy. Ning Xuema knocked her head and scolded herself for being a pig. She ran to close the door. Crack! A bolt of lightning fell from the sky, landing right beside Ning Xuema's feet and exploding. If it wasn't for Ning Xuema seeing that the situation wasn't good, and immediately jumping to avoid it, the lightning would have struck her head. Her heart was beating wildly. That shouldn't be necessary, right? Struck by lightning? She didn't do anything evil. The heavenly Tao still wouldn't let her go? The doors of the hall were blown open and closed by the wind, as if they were haunted. The hall's door creaked as it was blown by the wind. It was quite annoying. So Ning Xuema closed it again. Unexpectedly, before her hand could touch the door, another bolt of lightning struck down. Ning Xuema was prepared this time and hurriedly dodged. Her head was full of black lines. This lightning really did strike her. Even if she was a devil master, she didn't need to receive such high-level treatment, right? The wind and rain outside were even heavier. Strangely enough, as long as Ning Xuema had the intention to close the door, the lightning would strike her head. It worked every time. The heavy rain wanted to enter the great shrine unimpeded, so it didn't allow her to close the door? Or was it that as long as she left the protection of the bedroom, the lightning would come and be good with her? Ning Xuema was also bored. She thought for a while and didn't close the door. Instead, she stood in front of the door. Thus, another bolt of lightning accurately struck her again. Ning Xuema took a step back and rubbed her eyebrows in distress. Sure enough, it struck her again. It seemed that she had offended the heavenly law stone so much that it always wanted to strike her. Chapter 2021. Luckily, she was not outside. Otherwise, she would have been chased by the lightning. This lightning was not the same as the normal lightning during a rainy day in the mortal world. It was more like the lightning from a tribulation. Ning Xuema had gone through a tribulation before, so she had an impression of it. Whether it was the brightness or the lethality, it was the same as the tribulation lightning. The only difference was that she could not avoid the tribulation lightning. This time, the lightning seemed to be afraid of Shenjuli's house. When the lightning struck, as long as she dodged in time, she would not be affected. Strangely enough, as long as Ning Xuema did not stand at the door, the lightning would not appear again. Only the heavy rain would not stop. If she went out now and was struck by the tribulation lightning, would she be able to go back? Ning Xuema could not help but think about this problem again. She took 2 steps towards the door and stopped. Forget it. Shenjuli was already thinking of a way. She did not need to take the risk to test this. If the lightning did not strike back, and this body was damaged, it would not be good. She would also be sorry to Shenjuli. However, the flashing door was really a headache. Ning Xuema thought about it, and decided to use a spell to close it. Red light emerged from her fingertips to push the door. Unexpectedly, as soon as the red light touched the door, another extremely bright bolt of lightning struck down. This time, the lightning was 10 times bigger than the previous ones. It was so bright that it almost blinded her eyes. What was even more frightening was that the lightning bolt was not aimed at Ning Xuema, who was behind the door, but at the red light at her fingertips. The red light was connected to her fingertips. Once it struck the red light, it would be transmitted directly to her body. Looking at the brightness, it was at least 1,000,000 volts. If she was struck by it, she would probably turn into a pile of ashes. Be careful. A figure flashed over and hit the red light on Ning Xuema's fingertips. Ning Xuema jumped in fright. Before she could react, that figure suddenly hugged her and rolled inwards. A series of claps of thunder resounded in her ears, exploding along with their rolling figures. The sound of thunder disappeared. The room fell into a short silence. Ning Xuema's heart was beating wildly. She was very familiar with Shenjiuli, so she recognized him as soon as he hugged her. Although she was being hugged and rolled around in a sorry state, the first thing that rose in her heart was joy. But then she was a little surprised. Her ears were buzzing from the series of thunder, but she couldn't care less. She couldn't help but hug him. Almighty you, why are you so wet? Are you hurt? The red light she sent out earlier was to close the door, so she didn't use much strength. Although the bullet hit Shenjuli in the end, it shouldn't have hurt him. However, his body was too wet, as if he had been fished out of the water. When he hugged her and rolled on the floor just now, it was as if he was hugging an ice cube and rolling on the floor. An ominous premonition arose in her heart. As she spoke, she grabbed his wrist, wanting to see if he was injured. Shenjuli suddenly let go of her, and rolled to the side to avoid her touch. He silently sat up. Ning Xuema naturally sat up as well. The luminous pearl in the room wasn't turned on, so it was a little dark. Ning Xuema could only see his general outline, but couldn't see his real face. Ning Xuema simply ran to the table and opened the clamshell that hid the luminous pearl. The room was finally filled with soft light, and Shun Julie's sorry state was revealed. His long hair was tied up, and the rainwater flowed down his lapel. Chapter 2022. His long hair was tied up, and the rain was flowing down his clothes. His clothes were sticking to his body, and there was a puddle of water where he was standing. Ning Xuema finally got a clear look at his face, and her heart suddenly sank. His face was blue, and even his lips were pale. It was very abnormal. He was really injured, and his injury was not light. Ning Xuema felt a sudden pain in her heart. It was as if someone had pricked her with a needle. It was probably the first time he was so embarrassed in front of her, and he stepped back into the shadows. However, Ning Xuema grabbed his wrist, causing his body to stiffen and stop. Ning Xuema checked his pulse for a while, and she was a little angry. "You are so seriously injured, and it is raining so heavily. What are you doing here?" Shun Julie's voice was cold. "Why did you run to the door for no reason?" "I closed the door. The wind is making the door creak, and it is uncomfortable to listen to. Uncomfortable to listen to. But it is better than standing at the door and being struck by lightning, right?" Shun Julie was speechless. "Can't you be a little more quiet? Stay in the room." As he spoke, he went to close the door of the hall. He closed the door tightly, shutting out the wind and rain in the hall. When he turned around, he saw Ning Xuema standing there and looking at him with her big eyes. He was stunned. She still hasn't given up? She still wants to go out and be struck by lightning? This is a tribulation lightning. If you are struck by it, you will lose your life. He explained to her in a low voice, not wanting to see her do something stupid again. "I didn't want to go out and be struck by lightning. I just went to close the door." Ning Xuema couldn't help but explain again. Shun Julie was silent for a moment, and he didn't say anything. "Were you originally healing somewhere else, and you rushed back when you heard the thunder? Did you do it for me?" Shun Julie paused and interrupted her coldly. "I was just afraid that the hall would be flooded." He turned around and walked into the hall. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and followed him into the inner hall. The inner hall was the real bedroom. Ning Xuema was also a little wet from the rain just now. The heavy rain this time was quite strange. When they first got wet, it was just a little cold, but it was still bearable. But now, for some reason, it was getting colder and colder. The parts that were drenched by the rain were as cold as ice. The coldness seemed to be able to seep into one's bones, through one's wet clothes. She couldn't help but shudder. She had only gotten a little wet, and she was already so cold. What if he was completely drenched? Ning Xuema's gaze landed on him again. He was originally dressed in white, but at this moment, there seemed to be a faint flash on his white clothes. It was like ice. Without another word, she used her magic power to cover his body, wanting to dry him first. However, he didn't expect a red light to cover him. After the red light dissipated, his body was still wet, and the water was still dripping down. How could this be? Logically speaking, if she used this cleansing spell, even if he just came out of the water, he would be refreshed in an instant. How could it not work? Could it be that her power had regressed? Ning Xuema didn't give up. When she was about to use it again, Shun Julie walked away. "Don't bother. This rain can't be dried with magic." He walked towards the closet, where there were a few sets of clothes to change. It turned out that the rain in Fantion Palace could be so unique. Ning Xuema was speechless. He was seriously injured, and he came here in the rain. He was so wet that he couldn't just change his clothes. Ning Xuema waved her hand, and a big bathtub appeared. There was steam coming out of the bathtub. Chapter 2023. Don't be in a hurry to change your clothes. You should take a bath first to get rid of the cold. Ning Xuema tugged at his sleeve. Shun Julie lifted his sleeve and quietly avoided her. He turned around to look at the steaming bathtub and then looked at her, who was staring at him. Finally he said, "Thank you." He turned around and pulled the screen next to him, and circled it around the bathtub. Then, he took out a set of robes from the closet, and walked behind the screen. Ning Xuema was speechless. She was somewhat stupefied by his words. She stood there for a moment and couldn't help but shake her head. Thank you was a nice word, but when used between lovers, it made people feel like they were distancing themselves from each other. It seemed that she was the one who said it first. Now that he had smashed it back, the damage was quite great. The screen was very thick and almost opaque. Behind the screen, there was a rustling sound. Obviously, Shen Juli was taking off his clothes. Ning Xuema sat on the small bed and looked at the screen in a daze. She had already lost count of how many times they had rolled in bed. He was especially nimble in taking off her clothes, often peeling off her clothes like a dumpling. She was also familiar with his body, and she could even remember clearly what his abs looked like. Now there were only the two of them in the hall. Was he afraid that she would peek when he was taking a bath? Or was he deliberately using this to distance himself from her? There was the sound of water splashing behind the screen. Obviously, he had entered the water. Ning Xuema's heart was in a mess. She lay on the small bed with her clothes on, and listened to the sound of the wind and rain outside. When Shen Juli didn't come back, she felt a little desolate lying alone, and listening to the wind and rain. Now that he was behind the screen, she felt inexplicably at ease. She listened to his movements. His body was so cold that she was afraid that the hot water she put in would soon turn cold. "Do you want me to heat up the water for you?" After a while, Ning Xuema spoke to the person behind the screen. "There's no need," he answered with a nasal voice. "Did he catch a cold?" Ning Xuema thought for a while, and walked around the screen. "Let me see." As she spoke, she had already seen the big bathtub. Naturally, she also saw the person in the bathtub. Shen Juli was soaking in it, only his shoulders were exposed. His face was still pale, but his eyes were extremely deep. Seeing her walk in, his thin lips slightly pursed. "Get out!" His voice was cold. Ning Xuema didn't look at him and said, "Don't worry, I'm not here to take advantage of you." She stretched out her hand and waved it in the water. Sure enough, the water turned cold and almost turned into ice. Ning Xuema was speechless. His gaze then fell on his face. His face was still extremely pale, and the skin exposed above the water was faintly green. She reached out to touch his shoulder, and her fingertips froze. His skin was as cold as a dead person's. Shen Juli's body shrank back slightly to avoid her wolf claws. It was probably the first time that he was looked at like this while soaking in a bath. His thin lips tightened. "Get out." His voice seemed to be filled with ice. She had only been in for a short while, and had already been driven away by him twice. If Ning Xuema was thin-skinned, she would probably have left. But now, she pretended that she didn't hear him. She withdrew her fingers from his body, and then sat cross-legged in front of the bathtub. She pressed her palms on the bathtub, and used her psyche power to heat the water in the bathtub. She lowered her eyes slightly. She looked calm on the surface, but her heart felt as if it had been pricked by a sharp needle. Chapter 2024. It seemed that Shen Juli was seriously injured this time. He could not even heat the water, and his body was so cold. The white light emitted by the heavenly law was also so rude to the guardian. "How is your injury?" Ning Xuema finally heated the water in the bathtub, and could not help but ask. "I will not die," Shen Juli replied with 3 words. Ning Xuema choked. Did he have to talk to her like that? After all, she felt guilty toward him. Even if he was angry with her, she pretended not to see it. She tried to reason with him. "You may have misunderstood me. It is not that I don't want to stay by your side. It is that Nianma is in danger over there." She was about to tell him about Luo Jiuchen's coercion, and the tricks that she had used. Unexpectedly, her mind suddenly went blank, and she did not know how to continue. At the same time, the words appeared in her mind again. "Do not reveal the secrets of heaven. If you reveal them, it will change. If it changes, it will bring disaster." Ning Xuema was speechless. She understood the meaning of the words very well. If she told him these things at this time, the development of these things would change, and it would only be worse. These things involved little Nianma. Naturally, she did not want to make the situation worse for her son, so she kept quiet. Luo Jiuchen once promised that he would not do anything to hurt her and her son, but it did not mean that he would not send someone to do it. Little Nianma was still so young. How could he be the opponent of that old fox? She was afraid that he would be tortured to death in minutes. Thinking of this, she was anxious and could not wait to go back immediately. Unfortunately, she was locked in here and could not go back. Did Luo Jiuchen harm you and your son? Shenjuli suddenly asked. Ning Xuema paused for a moment. Just as she was about to answer with a yes, those words appeared again. It appeared again. She answered vaguely. That person is too evil. Then, Xuema, have you ever thought that in this era, we can take precautions before they happen? Shenjuli spoke slowly. His gaze finally fell on her face. You don't have to go back to that era. Since it will happen 50,000 years later, we have enough time to change everything. So much so that those disasters can't even happen in time, right? Ning Xuema closed her eyes. It's different. You might not believe me, but the time there. She was just about to say time is synchronized. But unexpectedly, those words flashed in her mind again. Ning Xuema. Tianji. Heavenly secret, you bastard. Shenjuli was still waiting for her to continue. How's the time there? Ning Xuema took a deep breath and said, Great God. The heavenly axiom on your side doesn't allow me to reveal the secrets of the heavens. Otherwise, it would only make things worse. Therefore, there are some things that I can't say. I didn't mean to hide it from you, Shenjuli. Although he was the guardian of the heavenly axiom, this was the first time he had encountered a situation like Ning Xuema's. His gaze fell on her face. He was a little suspicious. You received a hint from the heavenly axiom stone? Logically speaking, the words on the heavenly axiom stone could only be obtained by the guardian of the heavenly axiom stone through a secret technique. No one else could get a hint from the heavenly axiom stone. However, Ning Xuema actually said that she received it. Ning Xuema pursed her lips. It's not a hint. It's a warning. Alright, after all, she came from the future. She would definitely know a lot of things that would happen. It was understandable that the heavenly axiom prevented her from saying it. Chapter 2025. She grabbed his hand and looked at him. Almighty God, I really have my own difficulties. I can't leave little Nianma. You loved him so much at that time. She felt like crying when she said this. The Almighty God in this world had no impression of little Nianma. However, the Almighty God in the future loved little Nianma so much that he arranged so many things for the child before he died. At that time, Shenjuli whispered, Was it the me in the future? Ning Xuema was stunned and nodded. In fact, you still like the me in the future, right? Ning Xuema was speechless. She could not deny it. After I immortalized 50,000 years later, I left you and the child behind. You wanted to find me, but in the end, you traveled to the past and met me in the present, right? Ning Xuema was speechless. Yes. Then, if the me in the future did not exist, would you still like the me now? Shenjuli stared at her eyes and said something that was a little confusing. Ning Xuema was speechless. If she did not have a grudge with the Shenjuli in the future for 2 lifetimes, she would look for him everywhere after he immortalized. Then, if she somehow traveled to 50,000 years ago and met him again, she would not give herself to him so quickly. Perhaps, she would find a way to escape from him. She took a deep breath and said, There is no such assumption. In fact, I knew you in the future first. Shenjuli's eyelashes drooped slightly. So she loved him now, because he took advantage of his future self in the future. In her mind, he was just a substitute of himself in the future. Shenjuli never thought that one day, he would be jealous of himself. It was true. He had always been proud. Naturally, he did not want to be anyone's substitute. Even if he was to be his substitute in the future, he still felt very uncomfortable. He withdrew his hand that she had been holding tightly, and closed his eyes slightly. Get out. For a moment, Ning Xuema couldn't figure out what he was thinking. She tried to explain. Great deity. You have to find a way to send me back first. Once I'm done with the matters on the other side, I'll come back here for a while. She still had to find a way to change her fate, so she had to come back. Is this transmigration something you can decide on your own? Shenjuli's voice was slightly cold. Ningxuemo. No. She didn't want to lie to him. Every time she transmigrated, it was out of her control. She didn't even know what was going on. What if I can't transmigrate again after leaving this time? Can you bear to part with me? Shenjuli's words became sharper and sharper. I don't think so. I've been transmigrating quite frequently recently. You offended the Heavenly Tao. In order to punish you, the Heavenly Tao might make you unable to transmigrate again. Then you might not be able to see the current me again. Do you still insist on leaving? Ningxuemo. She paused for a moment before saying, I'll try my best to come back. Even if I can't come back, I'll try to resurrect you. The person you want to resurrect is me 50,000 years later, right? Ningxuemo pursed her lips and couldn't say anything. Shenjuli closed his eyes slightly. When he opened them again, his eyes were like a dark lake. He was calm. If you leave again, you don't have to come back. I don't want to be anyone's substitute. Ningxuemo. She felt a sourness in her chest that rushed to her eyes. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to explain something, but she didn't know where to start. Chapter 2026. After pausing for a moment, she finally found something to say. Why are you jealous of yourself? No matter if it's you now or 50,000 years later, you're still you. Shenjuli opened his eyes. Are you sure that I'll still be the same after 50,000 years? And not be reincarnated? Ningxuemo. She didn't know how Shenjuli left the mythical continent for the Tianxi continent after little Shuama sealed Zisha. It was not easy to leave the mythical continent. The passages to other continents were all sealed. Unlike the Tianxi continent, where one could go to other places through space jumps. The mythical continent was like a closed place. Once you entered, you would never be able to leave. Perhaps only by dying in the mythical continent and reincarnating could one be reborn in other continents. Therefore, she couldn't say for sure whether the Almighty in 50,000 years would still be the same Almighty now. Your appearance, style, and way of doing things haven't changed. She felt that Shenjuli had always been the same Shenjuli. He hadn't changed at all. Shenjuli closed his eyes. He was a god. If he reincarnated, he shouldn't have changed at all. Therefore, what Ningxuemo said couldn't prove that he would still be the same after 50,000 years. You can leave, Shenjuli said. His voice was colder than before. Your injury. Ningxuemo was worried. She kept one of her hands on the bathtub to warm it up for him. I know what I'm doing. Get out. Shenjuli simply asked her to leave. Ningxuemo. Her eyes turned red. She couldn't tell what she was feeling in her heart. She took a deep breath and reached her hand into his bathtub to feel around. Shenjuli leaned back slightly. You. Ningxuemo said. What about you? You think I want to take advantage of you? I'm just testing the water temperature. The water temperature was hot enough. His face looked better than before. Obviously he had warmed up. She was indeed not needed here, so she walked out in large strides. Shenjuli closed his eyes. His mind was in a mess, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. A moment later, footsteps sounded again. He subconsciously opened his eyes and frowned. Why did you come back? Ningxuemo put a change of clothes on the small table next to him. She didn't look at him. Don't worry, I don't mean to take advantage of you. I just want to give you a clean set of clothes. She turned around and walked out. Shenjuli. She looked at her small couch in the corner. Shenjuli didn't seem to want to see her. Should she continue to be an eyesore to him? It was raining heavily outside, and she would be struck by lightning the moment she went out. Naturally, she couldn't go out at this time. Therefore, after thinking for a while, she decided to go to the outer room and conjure up a bed before lying down. The outer room of the sleeping quarters was naturally not as airtight as the inner room. The wind outside could blow in through the cracks in the door. She lay on the bed and listened to the sound of the wind and rain outside. She was very sleepy, but she couldn't sleep. She didn't want to argue with him. But the sound of the rain outside was louder and fiercer. Her mind was as chaotic as the rain. This was the most difficult day since she came to this world. The wind was a little cold. She pulled the quilt closer to her body. Another day had passed. How was little Nianma? Creak, creak, creak. A gust of wind blew past, and unexpectedly blew open the tightly shut palace door once again. A gust of wind mixed with the drizzle blew into the room, causing Ning Xuema to shiver under the blanket. Chapter 2027. She stared at the two open doors, and was a little worried. If she went to close the door, she would be struck by lightning. If she didn't close it, she would be exposed to the cold wind for the whole night. Or should she move back to the inner room? Although it would be embarrassing, and he might even laugh at her, it was better than being exposed to the cold wind for the whole night, right? Forget it. She would move back. She got up and was about to take action. Ning Xuema. A shout suddenly came from the inner room. Before the voice died away, Shen Juli rushed out from the inner room. The outer hall was dark. Shen Juli saw the two open doors first. He thought that Ning Xuema had rushed out of the hall in a fit of anger again. The lightning tribulation was waiting for her outside. Maybe she would be struck immediately, and her soul would scatter and disappear without a trace. His face was pale, and his hands were cold. When he was about to chase after her, a voice came from behind him. I'm here. He suddenly turned around and saw the bed in the corner of the hall. Naturally, he also saw the person on the bed. Shen Juli was speechless. His hanging heart fell back into his stomach. Why did you run out? The bed inside can't accommodate you. Seeing that she was safe, he breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, the anger in his heart flared up again. Just now, when he came out from behind the screen and saw that there was no one on the two beds, his heart skipped a beat. Then, he heard the door open and thought that she had rushed out without a care. His tone was really not good. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that he was angry. His aura was already strong. Now that he was angry, his aura became even stronger. It almost made the temperature in the hall drop by a few degrees. He didn't get angry easily. Once he got angry, the people facing him would be scared to the point of kneeling down. He didn't expect that Ning Xuema didn't kneel down. Instead, she threw herself into his arms and almost made him stumble. His arms stiffened. For a moment, he didn't know whether to take advantage of the situation to hug her in his arms or push her out. Why did you run out to the outer room for no reason? His voice unconsciously softened by a few notes. You kept telling me to go out just now, so I thought you didn't want to see me anymore, so. Her little face was buried in his chest, and her voice sounded a little wronged. Shen Juli. Just as he was about to pull her off his body, he suddenly felt something wet on his chest. Was she crying? His heart seemed to be pricked by something. He coldly said, Why are you crying? Although his voice was cold, his arms could not help but wrap around her and gently hug her. He felt that he should be the one crying. He knew that the other party was only using him as a substitute, but he couldn't let go. You took matters into your own hands and forced me to stay without discussing it with me. I threw a small tantrum, and you became fierce to me. She began to accuse him, her voice choked with sobs. Shen Juli. This was indeed his fault. I was drunk at the time. He was powerless to explain again. If you weren't drunk, then you wouldn't have used this spell, right? Well, Shen Juli didn't know the answer to this question himself. Perhaps he would have used it. After all, he had studied this spell day and night for several days to come up with it. He had been waiting for her to come and use it as soon as she came. In the end, this thought became an obsession, and he didn't forget it even when he was drunk. You were fierce to me just now. You chased me away several times in a row, as if you were drawing a line between us. You didn't want me anymore. She continued to accuse him, her voice choking even more. Shen Juli. He felt like a scholar meeting a soldier, unable to reason with a soldier. Chapter 2028. Shen Juli, you've taken advantage of me so many times, and now you're turning against me just like that. You don't want me anymore. And you don't want me anymore. Why is my life so hard? How did I fall in love with you? She almost burst into tears. Her tears were warm, and they directly soaked his chest. Her tears seemed to have scalded his heart, and it tightened into a ball. At that moment, he had the illusion that he was about to be defeated. He just wanted to hold her in his arms and never let go. He lived in this world. And no matter what he wanted, he could get it with just a flick of his finger. Therefore, he didn't care about anyone, and no one could disturb his state of mind. However, this was the first time he was helpless in front of a woman, and it was also the first time he had the idea of getting someone by hook or by crook. He hugged her and walked into the room, and he couldn't help but argue with her. The person you love isn't me, but someone 50,000 years later. But that's all you. You've never changed. It's always been you. How can you be so unreasonable? She felt even more wronged, and she finally showed her little face, but her tears flowed down in both directions. She cried like this, and Shunjuli couldn't keep a straight face. At the same time, he deeply understood that when a woman was unreasonable, he would be shooting himself in the foot if he tried to reason with her. Forget it, it's my fault. Don't cry. He just wanted to stop her tears. Fortunately, although she cried, she still walked with him. She didn't throw a tantrum and stay outside. He half supported and half carried her to the bed. He looked at the small couch, and then looked at his big bed. He couldn't decide where to put her. He stood between the two beds, and while he hesitated, Ning Xuema, who was in his arms, seemed to be tripped by something, and directly fell toward the big bed. Shunjuli was hugging her, and he did not have much strength left in his body. Naturally, Shunjuli was dragged onto the bed by her. Unfortunately, Shunjuli ended up on top of Shunjuli. She pinned him so tightly that he could barely move. Shunjuli, he pushed her. Get down. Ning Xuema looked at him with teary eyes for a moment, and his heart tightened again. Ning Xuema's eyes dimmed. You're sleeping in separate beds from me, right? Then I'll go down. She rolled off his body and staggered, almost falling off the bed. Shunjuli almost subconsciously reached out and grabbed her. Thus, she was lying on top of him again. Her eyes lit up again. Are you going to sleep with me? Her eyes flickered in the dark night, making Shunjuli's heart skip a beat. He couldn't bring himself to refuse her. He had originally made up his mind to find a way to break the soul-locking curse on her, and then send her away. At the same time, he would forcefully withdraw his feelings and treat her like an ordinary person. But he couldn't do it. Even he himself did not understand why he would fall in love with someone so madly. Before this, he had only treated her as a child. Yes, his feelings for her had always been different, but it wasn't the kind of love that made people crazy like poppies. He had never cared so much about a person before. He wanted to tie her to his side every day, and he didn't want her to leave his side. This kind of care had become a kind of obsession, and this crazy obsession made him a little scared and a little confused. He didn't say anything, but he didn't push her away either. Chapter 2029. Ning Xuema knew that he was injured, but she was afraid that she would crush him. She rolled to the side and nestled in his arms. She reached out and hugged his waist. Almighty, you still love me, don't you? Let's not quarrel anymore. She didn't transmigrate 50,000 years just to quarrel with him, Shunjuli. Hugging her in his arms again, the feeling was not ordinary. It was as if he had found half of his heart. Hugging her like this, he actually felt incomparably at ease. However, he was still concerned about one thing. You call him Almighty? Ning Xuema knew that the him he was referring to was the Shunjuli 50,000 years later. Being jealous of her own future, she felt a little troubled. She nudged her head into his arms. I'm not calling him. I'm calling you. It's always been you. She started to beat around the bush. She rubbed her eyes again and said in a pitiful voice, Almighty, I'm sleepy. Her eyes were still watery and her nose was still red. Shunjuli's heart softened. He accepted his fate and pulled her into his arms. Go to sleep. Don't torment yourself anymore. Okay, Almighty. Good night. Ning Xuema kissed him gently on the cheek. Then, she hugged him and fell asleep contentedly. Her lips were like a butterfly. It was only a light touch on his cheek, but it made Shinjuli's heart skip a beat. Looking at her beside him, he had the urge to press her down and kiss her until the world turned dark. However, it was a good thing that he controlled himself in time. His current body did not allow him to do so. He was also extremely tired. Now that he had her in his arms, his heart finally calmed down. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. He didn't know when Ning Xuema had opened her eyes. She looked at him who had his eyes closed and was in deep sleep. Then, she gently pressed her palm against his chest. He was severely injured when he was struck by the heavenly Tao. Ning Xuema felt it when she hugged him just now. That was why she shamelessly climbed into his bed, just to be close to him and help him heal his injuries. Although Ning Xuema's medical skills were not as good as Shenjuli's, she could not be underestimated. She had created a kind of recovery technique, which was very good. Even if a person's organs were broken, she could use this method to quickly heal them. Shenjuli's current injuries were just right for her. However, the first time this method was used, it had to be done when the patient was asleep and his mind was completely peaceful. Therefore, she had been waiting for this opportunity. Now that Shenjuli had finally fallen asleep, she had no more scruples. Her palms gradually emitted a faint green light, and waves of it surged towards Shenjuli's injured organs. Ning Xuema didn't know how long she had been in this state. Seeing that the sky outside had turned white, Ning Xuema finally stopped. She then felt his pulse, and was relieved to find that his injuries had mostly healed. She heaved a sigh of relief, and her lips curled into a smug smile. Her medical skills were really not to be underestimated. It was just that he was usually too strong, so her medical skills were overshadowed. This set of techniques was very tiring. Ning Xuema had been busy for half the night, and it was even more tiring than fighting. She snuggled into his arms. After thinking for a while, she moved his arm to the side to prevent her from using it as a pillow. He was still injured, and if his arm was used as a pillow, his blood vessels would not flow properly. After everything was done, she finally fell asleep. Shenjuli had a super strong biological clock. No matter how late he slept, he would definitely wake up at that time. Chapter 20:30. When he opened his eyes, the first ray of sunlight shone on the windowsill. It was as if the storm last night had never happened. He looked at Gu Shijio, who was in his arms. She was sleeping soundly. Her long eyelashes covered her eyes, and her eyelids were a little pale. Obviously, she was very tired last night. There were dark circles under her eyes. He subconsciously reached out to touch her eyelids to wipe away the dark circles. However, he remembered that it was not suitable for him to use any more telekinesis. He sighed softly, and was about to withdraw his arm when he suddenly felt that his injuries had inexplicably healed by more than half. He was stunned. He knew his own injury very well. When he was attacked by the heavenly Tao, his internal organs were almost displaced. Several of his internal organs were cracked. This kind of injury could not be treated with ordinary medicine. It needed to be treated with telekinesis. However, after he was hit by the lightning, his telekinesis was almost depleted. It was difficult for him to heal himself. Initially, after he left Ning Xuema, he hid in a quiet room to heal himself. When he heard the thunder, he rushed back to his bedroom regardless of the pain. What he did last night had worsened his injury. That was why Ning Xuema could easily push him to the ground. This kind of injury could not be healed automatically with rest. It had to be treated. Now he had only slept for a while, and he was almost healed. His gaze fell on Ning Xuema's pale face. What did she do to him last night? Did she heal him? He slowly touched her pulse and sensed her body. Her telekinesis was not reduced, but her physical strength was exhausted. When he was about to sleep, he saw that her lips were still pink. However, at this moment they were a little pale. This was obviously a symptom of excessive exhaustion. Nianma, Ning Xuema, who was sleeping soundly, suddenly murmured. Shenjuli's fingers that were holding her wrist tightened slightly. She was actually still worried about the child. A half-year-old child. Shenjuli was usually too arrogant, and did not talk to ordinary people. Therefore, he did not understand the situation of a half-year-old child. When he was half a year old, he had already started to roam the 6 realms and was already famous. As for Shuama, when Shuama was half a year old, she had already become a little overlord on a small mountain in the demon realm. She had even decorated her own nest with sparkling pearls that could blind people's eyes. She proudly pulled him to look at it. He and Shuama were both orphans, so he couldn't understand what it was like for a child to lose their parents' protection. That kid should be able to become independent now, right? It wasn't good for him to keep pestering his mother. If he had the chance in the future, he would definitely teach that brat a good lesson and let him learn to be independent. Shinjuli thought unkindly. He originally wanted to get up and cultivate, but looking at her in his arms, he didn't want to move. I'm so hungry. Ning Shuama mumbled again, frowning slightly. It was only then that Shinjuli remembered that she hadn't eaten anything the entire day yesterday. Ning Shuama slept until late in the morning before she woke up. When she woke up, she found Shinjuli sitting next to her and cultivating. He seemed to have sensed her movement and opened his eyes. You're awake? Let's go eat if you're awake. In fact, Ning Shuama smelled the aroma of food when she woke up. She smiled and squinted her eyes. Needless to say, the Almighty had already prepared breakfast for her. She rushed to him, hugged his neck, and kissed him on the cheek. Almighty, kiss me. After the kiss, she jumped out of bed and went to wash up. Shinjuli touched the part of his body that was kissed by her. There was a kind of warmth bubbling in the depths of his heart like spring water. Chapter 2031. The food that Shinjuli prepared for her was very good. It was all her favorite food. More importantly, it was no longer a fish. Ning Shuama's eyes almost turned into a crescent moon. Shuama had been eating fish for the past few days. Although the fish was very delicious, she was tired of eating it every day. Now the table was full of all kinds of food. It looked, smelled, and tasted good. Great God, why don't you eat with me? Ning Shuama pulled his sleeve again. Shinjuli was helpless. In fact, he had already abstained from eating. He rarely ate. Even if he occasionally ate a little, it was just to taste something new. Now looking at her watery eyes, he suddenly felt a little hungry and had the desire to eat. The two of them sat at the table and ate. The atmosphere was very harmonious. As Ning Shuama ate, she thought of her son. How nice it would be if Nianma was here too. A family of 3 sitting together to eat. This should be the most common scene, but it seemed like an extravagant hope to her. She wondered how little Nianma was doing now. She had died in front of him 2 or 3 times. He should be mentally prepared and would not be too afraid. However, the premise was that the bastard Luo Jiuchen would not find trouble with him. However, based on Luo Jiuchen's character, once the prison was broken, he would definitely come out. She was not sure if the 8 mythological beasts could successfully steal her body and transport it back. If they were intercepted by Luo Jiuchen, she was afraid that her body would fall into his hands. She did not know what he would do by then. Initially, she was still smiling, but the smile disappeared as she ate. She frowned slightly. She picked up a piece of meat, but it fell back to the plate. A few drops of vegetable juice splashed on her face, but she did not seem to feel it. Shinjuli quietly took a handkerchief and wiped the vegetable stains on her face. He asked calmly, "Little Nianma, what does he look like?" Ning Shuama's eyes lit up. This was the first time that the master took the initiative to talk about his future son. She immediately said, "He is very smart, very beautiful, and very cute." She used the word special several times in a row, her tone full of pride as a mother. Shinjuli looked at her sparkling eyes and said, "Then you draw him later and let me see." "Sure." Ning Shuama agreed readily. She was an impatient person. She put down her chopsticks and wanted to take out a pen and paper to draw. Shinjuli held her hand. "Why are you in such a hurry? Eat first." He saw that she didn't eat much. Ning Shuama had no choice but to pick up her chopsticks again. She was anxious and couldn't help but wolf down her food. She almost choked on a piece of meat. Shinjuli rubbed his eyebrows and said, "Don't eat ravenously. You have to chew slowly. It's good for your body's recovery." "My body has almost recovered." Ning Shuama raised her face, her eyes lively. Almighty, our son is really amazing. You or me? He looks a little like you. He is so handsome that no medicine can cure him. His personality is a little like mine. Ning Xuema was exhilarated when talking about her son. So handsome that no medicine can cure him. Shen Julie resisted the urge to correct her bad habit of using words. He looked at her with a half smile. Like you in personality? Like to cry? Like to be spoiled? Ning Xuema was speechless. Could it be that little Nianma inherited her bad habit of crying? No. Since when did she like to cry? Most of her cries were fake. It was a trick. She rarely cried for real. Ning Xuema felt that she was strong, so she raised her eyebrows. I don't like to cry. Chapter 2032. Shinjuli glanced at her and said slowly, Who was the one crying last night? Ning Xuema touched her nose. Her crying last night was half real and half fake. If she hadn't cried last night, Shinjuli would probably still be angry with her. I don't usually cry. Ning Xuema defended herself. It seems that you only like to cry in front of me? Then, I'll feel a sense of accomplishment if I can make you cry. Shinjuli was back to his usual sharp tongue. Ning Xuema. She didn't know how she was when she was young, but she rarely cried after she grew up. She remembered that the few times she cried, it seemed to be because of Shinjuli. In front of him, she unconsciously acted like a child who longed for him to protect her. She wanted to share her happiness with him, and she wanted to taste her sweetness with him. How did you treat me last night? Shinjuli suddenly asked. A secret technique. I just succeeded in researching it. Ning Xuema answered casually. After answering, she raised her head and was a little surprised. How did you know that I treated you? She remembered that he was asleep at that time. I could feel it. Shinjuli looked at her. I didn't expect your medical skills to be so good. Ning Xuema smiled again. That's right. I've done heart repair surgery before. I've treated many difficult and complicated diseases. Well, when you have time, let's compare notes. Let me see your true level. Sure. I guarantee that you'll see me in a new light. Ning Xuema was full of confidence. Shinjuli liked to see her lively eyes and smiling face. Seeing her like this, even if he was in a bad mood, he would inexplicably feel better. Yes, he couldn't bear to part with her. He couldn't bear to let her leave. If she left again, it was hard to say if she could come back. If she couldn't come back, then he would have to be separated from her for 50,000 years. 50,000 years? What a long time. Originally, when he had no desires, he never felt that time was difficult to endure. Now that he thought about it, 50,000 years felt terrifyingly long. No way. He didn't want to be separated from her for so long. Perhaps he should consider transmigrating to 50,000 years later with her? Since she could travel back in time from 50,000 years in the future, he should be able to travel back in time as well, right? But what method should he use? While he was deep in thought, Ning Xuema had already cleaned up the leftovers on the table. She was anxious to let him see his son, so she took out a pen and paper and began to draw. By the time Shinjuli came back to his senses, she had already drawn a rough outline of her son. If Shinjuli's painting skills claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. Naturally, he could tell the quality of a person's painting. Ning Xuema's painting skills were not high. She did not have the artistic conception of a real painter. But she paid attention to realism. The child's figure gradually appeared under her pen and looked very lifelike. That child's every frown and smile were so lifelike. This showed the importance of this child in her heart. Only a person who truly cared about someone could draw that person's body and spirit with just a few strokes. What appeared in the painting was a child who looked to be 1 or 2 years old. He had a pair of big watery eyes and a small mouth that was slightly pursed. It looked as if he could jump off the painting paper and roll on the ground. Shinjuli's heart skipped a beat. It was obviously the first time he saw this child, but there was an inexplicable sense of familiarity. It was as if he could hear his delicate voice calling out, "Lord Father." It was as if he could hear the boy's soft voice again, and something in his heart seemed to melt slightly. She is indeed cute. He made an objective evaluation and began to think about the next step. Shuama had once said that Fantian Palace had a new master, which meant that Luo Jiuchen had already entered Fantian Palace before a secondary god obtained the qualification of the master god. There were many places in Fantian Palace that he could not enter without the permission of the master god. There were only a few places that he could live in. Shuama especially hated the waterside pavilion, so it seemed that Luo Jiuchen was more likely to live in the waterside pavilion. Perhaps he could start from these places to protect his wife and son. Ning Shuama had no idea what Shen Juli was thinking about. Her gaze fell on the painting, as if she could see her son's cute little face. Chapter 2034. What was Nianma doing now? 50,000 years later. Inside Mo Palace, all the demonic weapons were unsheathed, and their bows were strung. Everyone looked serious, and the atmosphere was tense. Outside Mo Palace, people from the celestial world, the human world, and the beast world had gathered and surrounded the entire palace. Your Majesty, Mo Palace is heavily guarded. The 8 mythological beasts have used an ancient secret technique to completely cover Mo Palace. Our people can't break in for the time being. A soldier rushed to report to the Celestial Emperor, who was personally supervising the battle. The Celestial Emperor's face was gloomy. Continue to attack. Do it at all costs. Yes, Your Majesty. The general who led the soldiers turned around to make arrangements. The Celestial Emperor looked at Mo Palace in front of him, which seemed to be shrouded in waves. He slowly clenched his fists. A day ago, the celestial prison in the celestial world was raided, and the prisoners were taken away by the people from the devil world overnight. When the Celestial Emperor received the news, the celestial prison was in a mess. The guards were killed, and the floor of the prison was almost stained with blood. After asking a survivor, the Celestial Emperor found out that General Himu of the devil world led the 8 mythological beasts to save their devil lord in the middle of the night. However, they found their devil lord dead in the celestial prison. The 8 mythological beasts went crazy. They could have left secretly, but they came out with the body of their devil lord. Although the celestial generals guarding the celestial prison were not weak, they were obviously no match for the 8 mythological beasts. Their flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Wherever the 8 mythological beasts went, it was a bloody purgatory. The survivor did not survive because of his strong kung fu. The 8 mythological beasts deliberately asked him to spread the message to the Celestial Emperor and others. The 8 mythological beasts said, "If our devil lord can come back to life, it will be fine. If not, we will kill everyone in the 6 worlds to avenge her." After the survivor passed the message to the Celestial Emperor, the Celestial Emperor was so angry that his face turned green. His sister's death had not been properly resolved, and now there was a new debt. Yes, he did not have a deep relationship with his sister, but her death was a great humiliation to him, as the Celestial Emperor. Celestial Varch immediately contacted Luo Jiuchen, who was far away in Fantian Palace. He didn't expect that the voice transmission talisman would connect at first, but the voice transmission talisman was extremely noisy, and he couldn't hear what the other party was saying. Later on, he simply couldn't get through. The Celestial Varch tried to contact him several times, but to no avail. He knew that he could not count on him for the time being. Fortunately, the Celestial Emperor knew a little about the martial arts of the devils in Mo Palace. Their overall combat level was not as good as that of the celestial world. As long as the Devil Lord did not wake up, the soldiers of the celestial world would be able to beat the crap out of those devils in Mo Palace. The Devil Lord had snatched the Devil Realm's territory from the Immortal Realm, and the Celestial Emperor had always wanted to snatch it back. If the Devil Lord was still alive, he wouldn't dare to act rashly. But didn't the Devil Lord die in the heavenly prison? Since the Devil Lord was already dead, the Mo Palace was like a group of dragons without a leader. They were nothing more than a pile of loose sand. He could take advantage of this opportunity to reclaim his lost territory. The only thing that troubled him was the 8 divine beasts. One divine beast could fight against 100,000 celestial soldiers, let alone 8 of them. Thus, the Celestial Emperor thought for a while, and contacted the kings of the beast realm and the human realm. These two realms did not get along well with the devil realm, and at this time, they also wanted a share of the pie. Moreover, the 8 divine beasts breaking into the heavenly prison gave them a very good reason to send troops. Thus, the 3 realms jointly sent troops and aggressively came to Emo Palace to demand an explanation. They said that they wanted an explanation, but in fact they were attacking. Chapter 2035. They claimed to be asking for an explanation, but in fact they were attacking. Although Emo Palace was big enough, there were not enough devils in it. The Celestial Emperor thought it would be easy to attack Emo Palace, but he did not expect that the 8 mythological beasts would use magic to protect the entire Emo Palace. The outside of Emo Palace seemed to be covered with a layer of mist. Countless powerful immortals used all kinds of methods to break it, but they could not even make a crack. This scene was very similar to the time when Phanteon Palace was sealed. No one could break in. The Celestial Emperor, the Human Emperor, and the Beast King had each sent their most powerful subordinates, but it was still in vain. During this period, the Celestial Emperor used the directed audio spell to contact Luo Jiuchen several times, but he still could not reach him. He did not know where the future master of heaven and earth had gone. Otherwise, with Luo Jiuchen's ability, it would be easy for him to break in. In Emo Palace, Ning Xuema's body was placed in the side hall, where Shen Juli used to live. Mother. Little Nianma moved a stool to sit in front of the bed. His little hand held Ning Xuema's hand, and he felt a little uneasy. Although this was not the first time his mother was in such a situation, and his mother had even told him that if this happened again, he should obediently guard her body. As long as her body was not destroyed, she would be able to come back. However, little Nianma intuitively felt that his mother's coma this time was different from the previous times. Although his mother was not breathing and heartbeat before, her hands and skin were slightly warm. It was not as cold as this time. The coldness was like that of a dead person. Every time little Nianma held her hand, he could not help but shiver. He desperately used his little hand to warm her hand, trying to warm her hand. Mother, will you come back? You won't leave me, right? Nianma now had a certain level of power. When he used his power, even if he held a piece of ice in his hand, it could melt in an instant. Therefore, when he held Ning Xuema's hand, it became warm. However, when he let go for a moment, her hand became cold again. This made Shen Nianma very uncertain. The most important thing was that his mother had died in the prison. When she was brought back, there was blood all over her body, especially her wrists. A layer of skin had been scraped off by the iron chains. It looked like a bloody mess, which frightened him. Little Nianma used to apply the best ointment that his father had given him on his mother. When she was unconscious, the wounds on her body would slowly recover after applying the ointment. But this time, the medicine had been applied for a day, but her wound was still the same. Not only did it not show any signs of improvement, the color had even turned black. It looked even more shocking. Chapter 2036. Shen Nianma used to feed it and talk to it every day. However, ever since his mother was rescued, he had been so focused on his mother that he did not drop his blood on Little He for 2 days. Little Nianma quickly found Little He, and his heart skipped a beat. It had only been 2 days, but the Little He had not seen it for a long time. The 5 small leaves were drooping and yellowed. It was only half an inch tall. It looked like it was going to die at any time. It seemed that a gust of wind could blow it away. It was the first time Shen Nianma saw Little He with such symptoms. He was shocked. While blaming himself for his negligence, he quickly dropped a drop of blood on the Little He. Originally, after he dripped a drop of blood on her, Xiao He would immediately swallow the blood. Soon, she would be as lively as a dragon and as lively as a tiger. Her leaves would be so tender that water would be squeezed out. However, it did not work this time. The Little He was still dying. The blood was not absorbed by the leaves at all. Instead, it slowly slid to the ground, Shin Nianma was stunned. He knew better than anyone else how much his mother treasured little he. If little he died like this, his mother would be heartbroken when she woke up and saw it. His mother had not woken up yet, and little he was going to die. Shin Nianma was helpless when he saw little he. He could not help but drop a few more drops of blood on little he. But it did not work at all. Shin Nianma wanted to come to little he for a miracle, but he was shocked. He squatted there and did not know what to do. After thinking for a while, he stood up and ran back to the house. Mother, your most precious little he is dying. Can you get up and take a look at it? Nianma is scared. Little Nianma rushed to the bed and held Ning Shuama's hand. He begged with tears in his eyes. The person on the bed did not respond, and her hand was even colder. Shin Nianma held her hand, as if he was holding an ice cube. He stared blankly for a moment before he hurriedly circulated his qi to warm her up. But in the process of circulating his qi, he discovered something even more terrifying. His mother's arm was a little stiff. His little heart almost jumped out of his chest. This had never happened before. Only the body of a dead person would slowly stiffen. It was an illusion. It must be an illusion. Little Nianma panicked and quickly moved her wrist and elbow joints. Little Nianma's eyes were already filled with tears when he tried to move his elbow. It wasn't an illusion. His mother's elbow was really stiff, and he was having a hard time shaking it. Mother! Wah! Mother, don't scare me. Mother, you have to warm up. Don't be so cold. He covered Ning Shuama with 3 to 4 layers of thick quilts. Then he snuggled into her arms and said, Mother, don't leave Nianma behind. He is waiting for you to come back. His tears soaked Ning Shuama's clothes. His whole body clung to her like an octopus, trying to warm her with his body temperature. Another burst of battle cries came from outside, and the barrier jointly set up by the 8 mythological beasts shook slightly under the impact of countless magical weapons. Little Nianma could also feel the tremors in the depths of the palace. His eyes were red. Those bastards! Even after killing his mother, he still wouldn't give up. He even came to Emo Palace to bully him. He was going to fight it out with them. He jumped out of the bed and ran outside. His short legs were strong, and he was the son of the Devil King. None of the ordinary subordinates in Emo Palace dared to stop him. They watched him run in the direction of the gate. Chapter 2037. Fortunately, he was stopped by General Manager Himu at the gate. Young master, where are you going? I am going to fight with them. I want them to compensate my parents. Little Nianma's whole body was trembling. General Manager Himu's expression changed slightly. The Devil Master is not back yet? General Manager Himu knew about Ning Shuama's soul leaving her body. Therefore, he still had a lot of hope that the Devil Master would wake up in time when Ning Shuama was rescued. As long as the Devil Master woke up, this crisis could be resolved. Now that the 3 realms were attacking fiercely, the wizardry barrier outside the Emo Palace seemed to be unbreakable. But it would not last long. The 8 mythological beasts could not hold on any longer. Even if the 8 mythological beasts could hold on and prevent all the enemies from attacking, there were so many people in the Emo Palace. They needed to eat, and there was not much food left in the Emo Palace. At most, they could only last for 4 or 5 more days. They were besieged and could not go out to buy food. Once they ran out of food, the entire Emo Palace would collapse. At that time, Emo Palace's power would truly be gone. It was not a big deal to lose their territory, but the entire Devil Kingdom would be in a bloodbath. It could be said that the Devil Master's life was now related to the rise and fall of the entire Devil Kingdom. General Manager Himu could not help but be nervous. He pulled little Nianma to a quiet place and carefully asked about the specific situation of the Devil Master. He then personally went to the side hall to take a look and frowned. It seemed that he had to prepare for the worst. The Emo Palace could be abandoned, and all the devils in the Emo Palace could fight to the death. But the Devil Master's bloodline must be preserved. If the Devil Master could not be resurrected, then the Devil Master's son was the key to the entire Devil Kingdom's prosperity. Young Master, you must not be impulsive at this time. Where there is life, there is hope. You should go back and guard the Devil Master. Maybe. The Devil Master has always been able to create miracles. Maybe she can wake up. As long as she wakes up, we will be saved, General Manager Himu said to little Nianma. How can they be so shameless? They killed my mother and still dare to attack us. Little Nianma clenched his fists tightly. Father and mother have done so much to protect the 6 realms. They even sacrificed their lives. Shouldn't they be grateful? Head Steward Himu sighed. In this world, everything was either black or white. Once a conflict of interest was involved, who would care whether or not you were indebted? It was the same between nations and the 6 realms. The principle was too profound for head butler Himu to explain to little Nianma at the moment. He could only wait for little Nianma to understand it on his own when he grew up. Chapter 2038. After breakfast this morning, Shunjuli took her out to set up the array in Fantian Palace. All the passages leading to the waterside pavilion were set up, and each array was different. Because Ning Xuema was also quite proficient in arrays, and had some strange ideas, she helped Shunjuli from time to time. Almost all the arrays were the crystallization of their wisdom. Ning Xuema was quite cheerful at the beginning, but later, she didn't know why she was distracted from time to time. Just now, she almost stepped into her own trap. Shunjuli hugged her in his arms. Xuema, you miss him too much. Maybe, but she was panicking. As time went by, her heart became more and more panicked. She opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Shunjuli said first, "This afternoon, I will start to study how to solve the soul-locking spell. I will try to send you back." He made a promise to her. Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that he would keep his promise. She was still worried about his health. What about your injuries? This morning, after eating breakfast, Ning Xuema originally wanted to treat his injuries, but was dragged out by him without any explanation to set up a trap. She didn't know who he wanted to trap. Shunjuli shook his head slightly. It's okay. After his injuries were mostly healed, most of his power was restored. Naturally, it was much faster for him to heal himself. In addition, with the medicine he made himself, his injuries were much better in the morning. He was basically fine. Ning Xuema knew that he was the kind of person who liked to bear pain alone, so she didn't ask him again. Instead, she directly picked up his wrist and felt his pulse. Shunjuli let her hold his hand, and there was a glimmer in his eyes. Ning Xuema finally put down his hand and sighed. God is really a god. His recovery ability is also extraordinary. If she suffered an injury like his, she would probably have to lie in bed for a few days. If he was willing to go into seclusion to research how to break the soul-locking curse, then he would have succeeded halfway. Yes, she was indeed very anxious. She couldn't wait to transmigrate back. However, things had already developed to this point. There was no point in being anxious. She could only wait. During this period of time when he was in seclusion, she also happened to cultivate her medicinal skills. She found that her cultivation here was also very useful. If he could cultivate his alchemy skills to level 9 during this period of time, that would be even better. By the way, Guru, who is this mechanism targeting? Now that there were only the 2 of them in the palace, no one else could enter. Ning Xuema felt that it was unnecessary for the Almighty to set up so many traps in her house. Shunjuli had just finished setting up another mechanism. His voice was faint as he said, "Didn't you say that this Fantian palace would be occupied by others one day? I'll add some ingredients in advance." Ning Xuemo recalled the scenery she saw in Imo Palace 50,000 years later. It seemed that there were no such mechanisms. Could it be that the Almighty was going to tear it down again? Ah no. Ever since she transmigrated, this space-time seemed to be a bit strange. The flow of time on both sides seemed to be the same. In other words, however many days she stayed here, the same amount of time would pass on the other side. If the time on both sides was synchronized, then the person living in Fantian Palace on the other side was Luo Jiuchen. Was the Almighty setting up a trap for Luo Jiuchen? She silently calculated the time, and was suddenly shocked. When she and Shunjuli were renovating the waterside pavilion, It should be early in the morning on the other side. Chapter 2039. When she and Shinjuli were renovating the waterside pavilion, it should be early in the morning there. If there was no accident, Luo Jiuchen should be resting in the waterside pavilion. Then he fell asleep in the middle of the night, and was doused with a few buckets of cold water. Then he fell into the array. Ning Xuema knew a thing or two about the array that Shinjuli had set up. She knew that it was definitely unpredictable. If Shinjuli hadn't explained it to her in advance, it would have taken her a whole day to break out, even if she was an expert in arrays. How much did Luo Jiuchen know about arrays? Ning Xuema talked about Luo Jiuchen with Shinjuli while setting up arrays with him. She wanted to know more about him. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. From Shinjuli, she learned some of Luo Jiuchen's weaknesses. For example, he was fond of wine and was suspicious. He wasn't good at arrays. However, because he had fought with Shinjuli many times, Shinjuli didn't want to fight with him. When Luo Jiuchen kept pestering him, he used arrays to trap him for a while. In this way, Luo Jiuchen's attainments in arrays were remarkable. Ning Xuema pondered for a moment, and finally understood why the Almighty wanted her to set up arrays with him. Luo Jiuchen was already familiar with Shinjuli's array style, so it was easier for him to break it. However, he wasn't familiar with hers. Once she added in her array style, it would take Luo Jiuchen twice or several times longer to break out. Understanding this, Ning Xuema put more effort into setting up arrays. She wanted to set up a large array in the whole Fantian Palace, so that Luo Jiuchen couldn't escape. Even if he escaped, he wouldn't want to go back to Fantian Palace. Shinjuli told her that there were many places that didn't need to be set up because Luo Jiuchen wasn't qualified to enter at all. The cooperation between the two went very smoothly this time. Shinjuli really didn't expect that she would be so proficient in arrays. He couldn't help but sigh. Xuema, what have you experienced in the past 50,000 years? Ning Xuema's eyes flashed and she smiled. You can just take it that I've been reborn. No one could not change the hardships of 3 lifetimes. Shinjuli raised his hand and rubbed her hair. I like your change. He looked at the sky with a hint of longing in his eyes. Perhaps I should follow you to your world to take a look. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She was naturally very willing to take him back. But was it that easy? In the blink of an eye, another 3 days passed. During these 3 days, the two of them did their own things. Shinjuli went to study spells, while Ning Xuema locked herself in the medicine refining room to refine medicine. The two of them didn't meet for the past 3 days. Chapter 2040. Bang! She bumped her head into someone. One of them held her up. Why are you so careless? She rubbed her sore nose and looked up. Great God! This was really a case of speaking of the devil. She smiled and showed him the pill in her hand, as if she was presenting a treasure. Come take a look. What is this? Shinjuli looked at the pill rolling in her palm, and then looked at her dusty little face. He raised his hand, and wiped the dust off her face with his sleeve. Xuema is really the best. You can actually refine a 9th grade medicine so quickly. Ning Xuema was immensely proud of herself. Of course. I'm the devil master. Naturally, I'm the smartest. Shinjuli took advantage of the opportunity to grab her waist and walk out with her. Let's go and get some fresh air. Look at you, you're like a little devil. The lake rippled slightly, and the lake water gently lapped against the shore. Above the lake, there was a colorful light that changed. It was magnificent. On the grassy ground beside the lake, there were several pots lined up in a row. Shinjuli had caught a fish at some point, and started to make an all-fish feast. Ning Xuema wanted to help him as well. However, Shinjuli asked her to sit down on a stone bench, and wait for the food to start. Ning Xuema was the type of person who would only get busier the more she tried to help him. Shinjuli always did things smoothly and elegantly. He could even make a meal full of immortality. He was probably the only one in the world who could do this. Ning Xuema felt that Shinjuli seemed to have something on his mind. He looked a bit like he was making a last supper. Hey! This sentence was so inauspicious. Ning Xuema automatically dismissed this thought. The all-fish feast that Shen Juli made was very sumptuous. Ning Xuema ate very contentedly. She actually wanted to ask the great god how his research on the soul unlocking curse was going. She didn't know why she didn't want to ask. If she asked, it would be like rushing him. It was better not to ask. He would naturally tell her if he managed to figure it out. To be honest, Ning Xuema seemed to have heard little Nianma's cries a few times during the 3 days when she was exhausted. The cries were getting louder and louder each time. In the end, it sounded like he was crying out loud. It made her heart feel as if it had been fiercely grasped, and she was startled with cold sweat all over her body. This time, the fish was exceptionally delicious, but Shen Juli didn't eat much. He only picked up a few pieces to accompany her. Although the two of them were both in the Fanteon Palace, they hadn't seen each other for 3 days. Now that they were reunited, they couldn't help but sit together. They were originally sitting side by side, but as they sat there, Ning Xuema was unknowingly held in his arms. Her petite body fit perfectly in his embrace. Ning Xuema felt that the Almighty was especially homely and warm today. Yes, it was warmth. When she sat in his arms, Ning Xuema only felt a warm current gently rippling in her heart. In her heart, she actually had the idea to stay and accompany him forever. If she traveled back in time, she was afraid that she would have to face a bloody storm. She was doing all kinds of efforts for the return of Shen Juli over there. However, after all, she was not 100% sure that she would succeed. What if the great god over there couldn't be reborn? Her life was still a bleak one. But if she didn't go back, what about little Nianma? Oh right, until now, the memory of her 2 lives had not disappeared. Did it mean that history had not changed? It had been more than 20 days since the substitute was sent to the Devil Kingdom to suffer. According to Mother Earth, little Xuema should have already become a devil at this moment. She should have begun to kill in the Devil Kingdom. Perhaps, she had already killed her way to the underworld. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.